Fabulous, thank you very much. Do we have any declarations of interest? Nope, brilliant. And sorry.
Yes, so I'm the ward councillor for Horfield, so for the Tilling Road one I'll be actually speaking on behalf of residents, so I won't participate in that one.
Lovely, thank you very much. And Andrew?
I'm not sure if I should declare this or not, but I'm technically, having previously lived in Totterdown, I'm technically still a member of TRESA, who do have a statement in on one of the applications.
So will you be recusing yourself from that item, or do you feel like you've got a...
I don't feel like I need to recuse myself, not prejudged it.
Okay, great. That sounds fine to me. Fabulous. Okay, minutes of the last meeting. Any issues with that, or everybody happy to sign it off as is? Yes, good. Brilliant. Thank you very much. Okay. Action sheet. Gary. Yep, please, thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chair. This is just following up on actions identified the last meeting. And during the appeals section, a couple of members of the committee asked me to send them copies of the decisions. So I did one fairly quickly and the other one only yesterday. So apologies to Councillor Pulteney for doing that late in the day, but nothing prompts you more than an action sheet of a meeting. So yeah, they've both been fulfilled, Chair.
Fabulous, thank you very much. And number 6, appeals, please, Gary.
Yes, thanks, Chair. Nothing lengthy to talk about this time around, but a couple of things just to identify. First of all, this may well have been in the papers last time around for your meeting, but item 12 listed at the top of page 18, I think I may have mentioned it actually, confirms that an appeal's been made against the refusal related to the Windmill Public House. So that's kind of working through under the written reps procedure at the moment. And of course, as soon as we get a decision, we'll let you know what that is. And then just one of interest, sort of citywide really, albeit this was a decision made some time ago by the DCA committee. Members may well be aware of the proposals at Silverthorne Lane in Temple Quarter, a mix of housing, employment space, student accommodation, and also a new secondary school. The committee, in line with officer recommendation, had recommended approval, but in this case, because the Environment Agency had a holding objection in terms of flooding, the application was called in by the Secretary of State. And so that process took up a large part of last year and some of this year as well, waiting for the decision following that. And I'm glad to say that it says appeal allowed, but it wasn't an appeal, it was just an application recovered by the Secretary of State. But following the report of the planning inspector, the Secretary of State, or in this case it was the planning minister, has decided to grant permission for the development. So, so taking a different stance to the issue of flooding than the Environment Agency. So in that part of the world we've had that decision. We've also had an appeal decision to the south of the feeder on Feeder Road for student accommodation that took us a little bit by surprise in terms of the approach taken to flood risk there. What it has done though, in line with the current thinking and work being done on the River Avon flood strategy coming to Cabinet later this year, it's also prompted renewed dialogue with the Environment Agency and also working together on potentially a planning document that will help guide applicants and ourselves as the planning authority through these issues going forward. Because there isn't a clear conclusion from all of these decisions, of course. That'd be too much to hope for, but there are some learning points that can be applied to applications going forward. And certainly this decision has prompted a lot of renewed interest in that area by developers, and because a lot of them have had their applications on ice awaiting this decision. So, so whereas it was a DCA decision, it is of citywide interest, so I just thought I would update the committee on that. Aside from that, nothing further to add, but happy to answer any questions.
Lovely, thank you very much. Are there any questions on any of that or anything else on appeals? No? Brilliant, thank you very much. Okay, then enforcement, please, Gary.
Thanks, Chair. No new notices served since the last meeting, but work is going on in terms of areas that we've been kind of asked to prioritise, such as HMOs, and also we have a particular high-profile appeal running at the Vale Garden Centre, which were notices that I think we listed last time around. So no notices served this time around, though. Hopefully have news of some more soon.
Brilliant, thank you very much. Okay, so then we'll move to the public forum, and the first item that we have on the agenda is number 18 Talbot Road. Now, we had a site visit for this following its deferral last time, so only the members who attended the site visit can take part in this particular item. And so for absolute clarity, that's myself, Councillor Beckles, how do you say your last name? Fab, can you say that into the... I'm not even going to try to repeat, I'm sorry. Councillor Brown and Councillor Alexander. Okay, so I'm going to call people up one by one to the microphone. And if you can speak clearly into the mic, and you can have 1 minute to speak. There is a traffic light system just here. When the minute starts, it's a green light. When you get 30 seconds, it goes to amber. And then when it's red, time's up. And if you can then bring your comments to a close, and I will start waving at you as that extends as well. Fabulous. So first we have Councillor Gary Hopkins, please.
Thank you, Chair. This application was made in 2018.
Oh, hold on. Can you go to the mic there? Otherwise, I think the webcam can't pick you up.
This application for property to be built here for a two-storey property was made in 2018. There's been some renumbering because there's been various to's and froing. There is no permission in place for what has actually been built. We are not majorly concerned about the extra storey that's been put on, but there's a major problem with regard to the road safety. When that application was made, it was approved for two-storey dwelling, but with conditions that the walls on the side and the front were restricted to 1 metre in height so that people could actually see what was going on. Now, when we did that, the applicant was told to knock down an existing wall that was there. It didn't actually belong to him, it was on somebody else's land, which he did knock it down, and he was told to rebuild it by the conditions that were put on at less than 1 metre, which of course he didn't do. He even built it above 2 metres. Now, there's obviously bad feeling between neighbours here, but we should cut through all of that. We have made ourselves a party to this dispute by putting that condition on the original application. We will be subject to a judicial review in the same way that the applicant will if this does not come to a satisfactory conclusion. Members saw this morning, those that were there, that this is not a safe exit from that driveway, and basically any car coming out there will come across the pavement without being able to see what's going on and onto an extremely busy road, which is dangerous without that addition. So I ask the committee to make certain that they take into account all the facts with regard to this, and not just what has been put in front of you now and the version of things that has been given to you.
Thank you, Gary.
This goes back for 4 years. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And then David Trevor, please.
Thank you. Firstly, can I just point out that there is no longer a dispute over ownership of the land. Mr. Beck has commissioned a survey, an independent one, which has ruled quite clearly the land belongs to my daughter and her partner. Drawing number 2021-03A clearly shows a red line denoting application limits passing right down the centre of that eastern wall, placing at least half that wall and the neighbour's land in the application. Building control have never been involved on this site, and any suggestion they declared the wall unsafe is an intentional deception. Building reg certification was carried out by a private company engaged and paid for by Mr. Beck. We'd like to know where the photograph and report Mr Beck submitted are. We haven't seen them. Mr Woodhouse has never given written permission to knock down nor rebuild this wall. The sidetracking and peripheral matters Humphrey and Co refer to are the highly relevant false certification from Mr Beck that invalidates the original application and renders the decision unsound. This site has been rusted up and overgrown since I moved here in 2014, and I've never seen vehicles using it, so I don't know where the 4 or 5 that Mr Beck is claiming have come from. And we're puzzled by the comments that the boundary does abut Mr Woodhouse's land. We're not disputing that. It clearly abuts the land, but the wall is most clearly built on Mr Woodhouse and Miss Trevor's land. Thank you, committee members.
Thank you very much. Oh, I've lost my list. Edward Beach, please.
Good afternoon, Chair, Committee. Previously, 18 Talbot Road was a garage plot for three garages and a forecourt for a further 2 cars. It was in constant use because I used to use them. There were potentially 5 cars entering and leaving this premises at any one time. Now the application form has been reduced to just 1 car. Building control informed me of the poor and dangerous condition of the north wall. Please refer to the photos and the evidence submitted in the letter to building control. The north wall was previously 2.9 metres high. It is now 2.4 metres high, half a metre lower than the previous wall. The electric gate is 1.9 metre longer than the previous gate. In the 16 years that I've owned these garages, there's never been an incident with cars entering or leaving these premises. I now feel the wall and the electric gate is being 1.9 larger is a vast improvement on the safety to the general public and the residents of Talbot Road. I will be adding an additional 2 mirrors on either side of the wall for better visibility. I urge you to uphold the provisions of the development plan and the national planning policy and professional advice from your qualified senior planning and highway officers and grant planning permission. I have here in front of me an email from Mr.
Can you wind it up, please?
Yeah, Mr. Joe Woodhouse giving me permission to build on that wall.
Thank you very
That's
much.
evidence.
Thank you. Humphrey and Co, please. No, okay. Joe Woodhouse, please.
Joe is not speaking. He's never asked to speak. He's somewhat confused to find the S against his name. Basically, I mean, he's the sole breadwinner, and he really can't afford to give up half days pay just to come and address the committee. So he apologises, but it's not his fault he didn't ask to be here.
That's quite right. Yeah, people aren't compelled to come here. Okay, thank you very much for your public forum statement. We'll move over to Nigel, please, and the officer presentation. Colleagues, in your inbox this morning was sent a slide pack from Nigel for you to look at on your laptops. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, committee. Just prior to sort of moving to the presentation, which, as the Chair's just said, you did receive an email from, I just want to run through the report before you very quickly, just to highlight some key points. In the summary section, to explain to committee that this report is the update report following the deferral on the 23rd. I haven't put it in yet. I've not put it in yet. I'm not presenting anything yet.
If you plug it in a second.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yes, indeed. So the committee report's appended at Appendix 1. It points out that the application was deferred to enable the site visit to take place, which took place earlier, and it sets out that the recommendation is to grant planning permission for the new dwelling. The report includes an update which sets out some of the key factors that have taken place since the deferral on the 23rd of February, and indeed it goes on to assess the key issues And there are two recommendations being put to committee today. The first is that the new planning permission is granted subject to the 8 planning conditions listed. And I'd just like to draw attention to the proposed note to the applicant, which is set out, applicant note number 1, which reads, in accordance with the confirmation on the 21st of March 2022, this application and therefore permission does not include the side wall that has been erected and which was subject to a separate planning enforcement investigation, and then it gives the council's reference number there. And indeed, recommendation 2, just below that on the committee papers, requests that committee note and endorse the decision made in respect to the planning enforcement investigation with that reference, and that was in respect to the wall that was viewed on the site visit earlier today. Just to run through the presentation then, so this slide explains what the application is. It's an amendment to planning permission 18/03168/F. That consented the demolition of garages and the construction of a 2-storey dwelling. This application seeks to vary condition 14, effectively the approved plans condition, removes conditions 2 and 3, which related to vehicle visibility displays and required details of the front boundary, and does show an amended design to the dwelling. Here's the site plan, just to pinpoint the actual application site. I know you were there earlier today. Here we have the site layout plan. This is the layout pre-development, where you can see the 3 garages that were previously in situ. Here's an aerial photograph, and indeed a closer aerial photograph. This is a view looking back down Talbot Road back towards the A37. The bend in the road's just at a far point in the photograph, and on the left there you'll see the previous blue gate that was in place and the pre-existing wall that has now gone. These are the floor plans as built. You can see ground floor, first floor, and then accommodation within the roof space, and indeed the roof plan there on the bottom right corner of the slide. Here are the elevations as built, and you can see top left is the elevation into the courtyard. Top right is the side elevation as it faces onto Talbot Road, and then the 2 bottom elevations are the other 2, which you can see there without any windows in the vertical walls of the dwelling. The next slide shows some street scene images, the top one being the street scene image prior to development, the middle one being the approved dwelling, and then the bottom image being the dwelling as built and the subject of this application. The final slide to show just shows you the floor plans in context and the elevations again. Just to recap, we are recommending that the grant of planning permission is given for this new dwelling subject to those 8 conditions and the note to the applicant. And we are asking committee to note the recent decision in respect to the planning enforcement case. That's it. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Gary.
Chair, can I add as well that obviously you've heard a lot in public forum, understandably, about what's, pretty much a neighbour dispute over where a boundary between land ownerships is and whether a wall has or hasn't been built on land. It's just one of those things, unfortunately, that the council just isn't the arbiter over. There's obviously information there that has to be taken up between those individuals, separately, really. It's not something that as local planning authority we can get involved with. So whilst that was, kind of having an impact on the assessment of the application last time around, I feel that the separation out of the wall from the revised planning application has helped, and alongside that, then once an enforcement case was registered on the wall, because it was above 2 metres adjacent to a highway, then once that was brought below that level, then it was no longer needed planning permission, so no longer a matter for the local planning authority, hence the decision at the moment, which we hope you will endorse, to close the enforcement case. So just a bit of additional commentary there, Chair, which I hope is helpful.
Yeah, so we're not looking at the wall that we were originally looking at because it's now doesn't require permission.
Exactly, because of that, Chair, yes.
Exactly. Okay, any questions, please? Fabian?
Just a bit of clarification. So, I mean, the main point that's been raised from public forum has been about the disputes over the wall and where it's been built, but we don't actually have any jurisdiction over that. That is a separate issue that will have to be dealt with outside of this case.
That seems to be correct, isn't it? Yeah, that's correct. Okay. Exactly. Microphone on there when you're talking.
Oh, yeah, sorry. Just thought it would be important to get that completely out in the open so everyone knows what the situation is.
Exactly. So we're looking at the house as built as opposed to what had a permission and the wall in front of it. Okay, Andrew.
Although we are being asked to endorse the decision to close the other separated out application vis-a-vis the wall situation. So okay, so for clarity, what exactly are we being asked to endorse with regards to that application on the wall?
Yep,
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Councillor, it's not actually a planning application. What we opened up after February was a separate and planning enforcement investigation. That's simply a way of investigating an allegation of a breach of planning control. We concluded, as indicated, that there wasn't a breach of planning control and hence have closed that case. That's a routine process within the department that we follow. So there's no application made, simply that we investigated. So there's two planning enforcement investigations. The one that resulted in this application, the one opened in February after the deferral and some clarifications that were sought, and that's subsequently been closed once the works to reduce it to less than 2 metres in height were undertaken. And that is the second recommendation, to recognise, note and endorse that position that we've taken.
Microphone.
So just to absolutely spell out, the reason you're suggesting that we close the enforcement case is because the wall is now less than 2 metres high. The wall that is in dispute, it is less than 2 metres high, and therefore, because it's less than 2 metres high, does not require planning permission. Just to absolutely spell everything out.
Correct.
Great. Is everybody very clear now? Good. Does anybody have any questions? No, yeah. Or any statements or opinions about this that they would like to share? I will take that as a no, or is that a wave, Fabian?
Yeah, I think the house officers have said that the house is fine. It fits in, meets requirements and policies. So the house itself is fine. I see the point that legal, there's nothing more we can do vis-a-vis the wall. So I think I'm going to support the officer recommendation. I'm quite happy to propose it. What I would do is urge the two parties to try and find some agreement about where the wall could go. We can't actually help with that, but hopefully they can find some kind of way of closing the matter and getting on with their lives.
Yep, agreed. Andrew.
Yeah, so with regards to the house, I have reservations about supporting the recommendation in as far as the scale of the development as executed is far outstrips the permission given, and I worry about the precedent that potentially sets, the idea that people can play fast and loose with their permissions that they're given with impunity. I appreciate that there's probably not a lot of redress that the council can take on that, and perhaps that's something that needs to be looked at a national level. But I do think it is really concerning that the scale of what's developed, just the sheer difference between the scale of what's happened compared to what the permission was granted for.
Yeah, so maybe perhaps if we do pass the officer recommendation, we can do it with a note of a less than enthusiasm for future applicants building something else to the thing that they actually got planning permission for.
Yes, Chair. It's it's been a consistent frustration throughout the last many years of planning legislation where it's frustrating enough if a development gets permission and then another application comes in and another application, because the communities get confused and concerned that changes are kind of happening around there. Then even worse when it's built and then it becomes retrospective. But unfortunately, and we'll see what comes through the levelling up and regen bill that's been announced last week, more detail coming through this week, because there is some tightening up of enforcement provisions within there, but nothing that radical, I would suggest. But so we're left with a situation where you have to assess the proposal before you, literally before you, if it's retrospective, on its merits. So there can be all that dissatisfaction, which I understand, comparing it to what was given permission in the first place. What you have to do is kind of put that to one side and consider the proposals afresh, really.
Yes, and such creeping builds kind of doesn't do anything for sort of neighbourhood relations either. Shall we move to a vote on this one, if everyone's happy to? Yeah. Fabian, are you seconding that officer recommendation of? Okay, I'll do a roll call just to make that nice and clear. So first off, Leslie, into the mic, please. Sorry.
Put your mic.
Pop your mic on. We could do, but we'll do roll call because that's what we've decided to do for people.
Accept, agree.
Okay, good, thank you. Andrew?
With reluctance, agree.
Thank you. Katya?
I agree.
Fabulous, thank you. Fabian?
I agree too.
And I agree as well. Fab, thank you very much. Sorry about that. What we'll do is we'll just hold a moment whilst anybody who wishes to leave from this item leaves, and then we'll move on to the next one. Great, fabulous. So the next item we have is the former St John's ambulance site. Okay. And same situation again. I'll call people up one by one, as per my list, to speak into the mic for 1 minute. If you keep it concise, that'd be great. We had an informal site visit to this application earlier today, so we had a little look at the site. Not all members of the committee attended that, but all members can take part in the discussion, except for Councillor Philippa, because this is in your ward and you called it in, didn't you? So, you're speaking on this as well, aren't you? Okay, brilliant. Okay, so first up we have Fergus Sykes, please.
Thank you, councillors. I am Fergus Sykes, the applicant's planning consultant. The proposal is for the creation of 6 two-bedroom flats in a sustainable urban location, which would provide a small but important contribution towards the local housing supply. The applicant has listened to previous concerns and significantly reduced the scale of the proposals and moved the built form further away from the nearest neighbour. The scale of the proposed development would be in keeping with the surrounding area and would not cause any unacceptable overlooking or overshadowing. The proposal includes parking in line with the council's standards and includes an appropriate level of parking given the site's location near local facilities and public transport options, and then given the need to encourage sustainable modes of transport. 11 new trees would be planted in place of the existing relatively young trees at the site. This is in line with the Council's guidance and provides adequate mitigation to compensate for the loss of the existing trees. It is therefore hoped that you will support this application. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Philippa Hume, please.
Thank you very much. You'll have seen that we had a large number of objections to the proposed development on this site, and many others have told me informally of their concerns. So while obviously I appreciate the need for housing in the city, we are asking the committee not to approve this application for two key reasons. The first is to do with green space, climate emergency and ecological emergency. So the development would involve removing 10 trees and destroy some much loved grassy land where children play and which is very popular. The 6 younger tulip trees are very attractive, they're maturing well and are now around 8 metres high. The others are older, tall, and I think include an ash tree as well, which has escaped the disease. The trees and green space contribute greatly to the amenity of the area. They also contribute to carbon capture, mitigating the effects of climate change. And of course, I know the trees would be replaced, but it would take actually quite many years for them to grow to the size of those currently on site. And also, there's lots of chaotic traffic manoeuvres locally, and I think this would not do anything to help that. Thank you.
Fabulous, thank you very much. And then Mr. and Mrs. Piana, are you also speaking for them because it's got your name in brackets next to it? I think that's been cleared and that's why it's on the paperwork. Yep, so...
Yeah, asked if Councillor Home to speak for them.
Okay, great. So putting you on the spot now. Whilst we're waiting, we also have Helen Pillinger on the list, but not down as a speaker. Just want to check that she's not expecting to speak. Nope. Okay.
Okay, thank you. I'm reading this on behalf of the neighbours, Mr. and Mrs. Piana, and they are objecting, first of all, for a personal reason. They are the owners of number 2A Tilling Road. They have a lovely house tucked away at the corner where they enjoy privacy in a small garden. If the plan goes ahead, it will affect their privacy and it will be obstructive. In terms of community space, they enjoy the little green space. It's like a breathing space for the local environment. Remove that and the established trees from the area is not going to help the environment or community. We have lots of young children who happily use the space. Preserving that is vital for the community. Traffic. Tilling Road is a small, narrow road with heavy traffic, especially after the development of the hospital. There are huge traffic issues already with a fully packed street parking and people using the road as a diversion to avoid the main road traffic. Bringing more buildings into such a narrow space, allowing more parking or street parking is going to complicate things further. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. And then we'll move over to the officer presentation, and the same situation again, you've been sent slides for this earlier today. Fabulous, thank you very much. Over to you.
Good afternoon. So I'm bringing St John's site in Horfield on Tilling Road. The current application is flats on the site, which was formerly used as the ambulance station. Just to start with the context, I'm sure most here are aware, but to the west of the site, this building here is the TA Army Barracks, which creates a fairly sensitive situation with regard to constraint for anything that is built on the same site. And to the north and to the west is primarily two-storey, in fact entirely two-storey, terraced and semi-detached housing. There are no site designations within adopted policy regarding the space on this site. I wanted to start by just going over the process to date and the improvements we've achieved through negotiation. This originally came in at pre-app for 12 units as a sort of interconnected set of buildings. This was advised to be overly intensive as a development on this site, and the previous application to this one was refused for similar reasons, but you can see there's already been a breaking up of the solid massing to the proposed number of units on site and buildings on site. This application ultimately was refused as well as a result of several reasons: design impact, amenity impact, especially on number 2A, and as well issues with a lack of justification for the loss of trees on site, which I'll come to later on. Coming to the current application, this is the first revision, this is the first set of designs we received, and there you can see there are positive amendments again. The scale has been gradually reduced over time, the roofs have been pitched, balconies, 3 blocks, and those balconies were a cause for concern in case of any overlooking to adjacent properties. Moving on to the final revision, which is what's before members to discuss today. The balconies have now been removed. The northern block, which is adjacent to number 2A, has been moved slightly away from that building. The overall vertical scale of all of the development has been reduced somewhat as well. And then this is demonstrated on this plan here, where you can see the previous iteration there, and that the current northern block has now been moved slightly further away. So I want to move on to the floor plans, and there are now, as noted, 6 units proposed. They all meet necessary space standards. They all have outlook. It is noted, and it has always been noted by officers, that there is no outlook to the rear, which isn't ideal. However, the 6 units will all have large windows and access to adequate light, and there are louvered windows to the side elevations, amenity and surrounding residents, but that will add additional light to these dwellings. And one of the key areas of concern for local residents is the green space as existing. The arboricultural officer was consulted regarding the revised scheme and removed objection on the basis that an adequate Bristol tree replacement standard calculation for the replacement of trees was provided within this application. And the officer did note it was with regret that the existing trees would be removed. However, they would be replaced in line with policy, and so objection was removed to that. I should also note, in terms of ecology, an ecological officer was consulted and has recommended, should approval be forthcoming, that additional conditions be added for the protection of any wildlife, and a new ecological survey be conducted should there be approval. Another issue raised by residents and which should be addressed is the parking issue. With regards to the sort of congested state of play with Tilling Road at the moment, Transport Development Management were consulted, and they did accept that the parking survey demonstrates that the severity of the parking congestion in that part of Tilling Road is primarily as a result of daytime commuters using that space. And so that would be restricted, but that is not in itself considered to be something that would necessarily cause additional impact to existing residents. And following revisions, the parking proposed, the off-street parking, was found to be acceptable, and also been in bike storage as well. And just to conclude, all of the original areas of concern and objection to the scheme have now been successfully overcome in the opinion of officers and our assessment, and therefore it is recommended the proposal be approved.
Thank you very much. Do we have any questions? Leslie.
I'm a little bit concerned about the amenity of number 2A. It says on page 51 of your report that the residential amenity must, for existing neighbouring properties, daylight and shadowing is likely to be acceptable. And on page 64 it says it requires development to safeguard amenity of existing residents. These aren't quite the same. Would you like to comment, please?
Yes, so as noted in the presentation, there have, over time, development has been moved significantly away from number 2A and it has been reduced in height. And one test that I perhaps should have put in this presentation actually is if you apply a 25-degree line from the ground floor windows of the property of number 2A, then it would not cross over the roof of the proposed dwelling just to its south. And that's suggestive in BRE guidance that there wouldn't be a harmful impact from overshadowing or overbearing. And also, if you're on site, and it is noted that number 2A does face slightly towards the proposed northern block, however, none of the windows would be straight on, would be absolutely directly impacted by the wall to the neighbouring proposed building. So there would be no actual full-on blocking of direct blocking of the outlook to that house.
So was this daylight and shadowing report done after the building was moved back?
There isn't a daylight and shadowing report, but it's a test that we can apply when we're assessing schemes on amenity grounds. It's guidance contained, it's access to daylight and I forgot what the name of the report is now, but it's commonly used. And it's through applying angles, you can see in terms of the distance and exact location of the building, how much impact it's likely to have in terms of light and shadowing. So, yeah.
Any other questions? Andrew and then Katja.
Thanks, Chair. Sorry, just finding my questions. I notice there's a few things that seem to have been discussed with the applicants but haven't actually progressed. So things like the flood report, it seems, and I know it's been conditioned, but it seems disappointing that we've not had that in advance, especially when there's been previous applications and it's something that's been raised with them in the past. Anyway, that's a sort of side issue. I was going to ask about EV charging. The report states no EV charging has been proposed. However, in line with emerging policy, the applicant is encouraged to provide the minimum passive EV charging for all spaces. Is that something that can be conditioned or not quite yet?
I think further information in that regard can be conditioned in terms of it's a recommendation by Transport Development Management rather than a requirement, but it would make logical sense if that can be accommodated, that it be accommodated. We do have quite a wide range of proposed conditions to be added in on transport grounds, and sort of a bespoke condition could be drafted with regards to further details regarding EV points.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, it seems bonkers that we're now a handful of years away from fully petrol or fully petrol cars being sellable, but we don't seem to be moving very fast on getting the alternative infrastructure in place. But I know that's a general point. I was also going to ask a question about pedestrian visibility displays. Again, there's a need to provide them. Is that going to be conditioned too?
Yes, this has been requested to be conditioned, so that would be further information following any decision on the scheme.
Katja?
When we went to visit the site visit, it was quite obvious that the grass, the lawn in front of the house at the moment is
extremely biodiverse. There's a lot of different plant species in it, which is quite unusual for an inner city location. I was wondering if there was any sort of ways of putting that kind of diversity back, because in the plans it looks like there's a hedge and it's quite regular. And the other thing that struck me with one of the people opposing it was that she said her children like to play in that particular patch of grass, and if you're cutting it up with parking spaces, it seems like you're taking away space for children to play as well.
I think one of the issues with this particular area of land is that it hasn't been in use for quite a number of years, and it's not public land, and it's not got a site designation sort of protecting it, so it's not important open space. It doesn't have a designation like that on it. So it might be difficult to resolve the issue of children if they were playing on the site, whether obviously it's unlikely they would be able to in the future, but in planning terms there's not really much we can do about that, unfortunately, as it's not sort of public land. But in terms of improving biodiversity through the lawns, it might be possible to request again further details regarding how the lawns will be put in place. There are areas of grass that are proposed for the frontage. We could potentially look into conditioning just further details on how that would be approached given the level of sort of biodiversity that's already on the site. Yeah.
Andrew?
I'd like to ask about the trees. Two things, maybe a comment as much as a question. It strikes me, looking at the plans and having seen the site, that there might be potential to try and save at least some of the existing trees, whilst facilitating appropriate access to the site for the development. Notwithstanding that obviously there's going to be car parking spaces and whatnot, and at least some of that verge. But I was going to ask a more specific question about the replacement trees. Is it envisaged that the replacement trees would be whips, or would they be slightly aged?
I'm fairly sure they would be slightly aged. I'd need to refer back to the arboricultural assessment to be sure of that, but I'm pretty sure that there were, well, I say fairly aged actually. I'd have to look that up actually and get back to you on that if you give me a moment.
And I've got a question. I'm not sure how. Is it possible to actually remove those trees and save them to be moved to another location? And the same for the grass.
That's another good question. I think that would be good if they can be. I'm not sure, Gary, if that's...
Yeah, I know. I'm not a tree expert at all. I do know, I've come across a principle in the past where if you're planting replacement trees, there is a balance to be struck. So, yeah, whip place would take years to have the impact that the current trees are having on the area. But there's also, I think, in terms of practice, if you plant replacements that are too big, they won't then grow. I think there's a sweet spot in terms of an age of a tree that can get planted as a new tree that will then sort of take and actually thrive in its new circumstances. And that might be the same with translocating a tree from where it is now to a slightly different location on the site. So I think in a tree replacement strategy, the condition that would be looked at, but I'm not sure about reusing the trees that they're at the moment. I don't know how practical that would be, unfortunately, but we'll ask the applicants to explore that. But certainly the scale of the trees going in, we would want that to be as big as possible in relation to the trees that are being replaced, but still at that, in that kind of that age where they will still continue to thrive and grow on the site.
One of the things that Katja particularly noted when we were on the site visit was how much richer the grass was and its biodiversity on that side to the other side. Could we possibly look at moving the grass from this side into the other side to keep it kind of at least in the same ballpark of an area?
Yeah, I'm not sure about reusing what's there at the moment, but you do see more and more now, don't you? More kind of wildflower type approaches to areas, either public or private, that would have been kind of manicured grass. So I think what we'd be looking for in the landscape plan is sort of fairly limited but valued landscaped area at the front of the site. We, again, for the benefit of the applicants, we would expect something that would be, you know, more biodiverse than just simply a lawn and a border. So, yeah.
Exactly, and I know it's not part of the application, but do we know who owns the grass across the other side? Is that us?
I think it might be. It's not the case on the other side, but I think it might be our land. I'll have to double check that as well.
Yeah, because then maybe if we could condition, if you can't transport the actual grass, like more biodiverse planting on the other side, so that it's not so much of a net loss in the local area, perhaps.
Unfortunately, we can't get involved outside of the red line. Unfortunately, it's got to be the site as it's been applied for, really. So we can't go beyond the boundary of what we've got before us.
You're giving me great faces today. Okay, does anybody have any questions? Guy.
Thanks, Chair. My question was related to the parking statement on parking within key issues that I'm now struggling to find again. There we go, page 53. Yeah. So we're talking 9 new dwellings.
We're talking 6.
6 new dwellings, yeah. And there'll be 6 parking spaces will be provided off-street.
Correct.
Is that right? And it then says which falls below the maximum standard as set out within the Bristol local plan. I was wondering if you could just clarify what that means.
So with car parking, there is a maximum standard as opposed to a minimum standard, because it's general policy that we're trying to reduce the amount of car use and ownership in Bristol. And so, for instance, with bikes, we would say you need at least this many bikes for one dwelling. For a dwelling unit, you can have up to this many parking spaces, i.e. not 0 to, say, 2 for a 2-bedroom dwelling is appropriate. So 1 parking space allocated to 1 dwelling is within the 0 to maximum standard, which I think is 2 parking spaces.
I do have a bit of familiarity with this site. I know that the local residents were extremely upset about the lack of action on parking when Southmead Hospital came in, and that largely there's a huge chunk of the ward that's turned into a car park ever since. I'd just be very keen to avoid that problem being worsened, albeit slightly, but still by this development. Is there anything we could do to ensure that doesn't happen? I'm thinking specifically of a recent hearing that was in front of this committee where the idea of passive provision for a residence parking zone, should one ever arise, that these buildings would be excluded from such a zone. Are these things that were considered or could be considered?
With residence parking zones, that's generally restricted to the on-site provision, on-street provision of parking. So within this proposal, there would be strict measures for ensuring that that section of the road is generally clear from on-street parking completely. And the, I see, so if there was a zone in place,
I can come in there because I think that's the proposal as an advice note on the final item, actually. So we're in a similar situation here, I think. Normally we apply that advice note because it's like a message to our transport colleagues when they get applications for parking permits. If you're part of a low or 0 car development, you can't then be applying for parking permits. So, in every scheme that's within an existing residence parking zone, we would apply that advice note, that kind of which is a level of control. Whether you do that outside of existing residence parking zone is a matter of debate, but it's what we're recommending on the final item, which isn't that far away from here. So I think in terms of being consistent, we could add the same advice note to this one.
Great, fabulous. Fabian, you had your hand?
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify. So the 6 parking spaces, 1 will be allocated per flat. It's not going to be free fall?
No.
Cool.
Great. Any more questions, or shall we move to generalised comments? Who's got a comment? Andrew, you go first.
Just wondering if you'd found the answer on the trees.
Yeah, so, it's not on there. Right, okay. So I've got, can I move this over? No, I can't. So I have found on the tree planting schedule that the girth at planting of all the trees would be between 14 and 16 centimetres. So they wouldn't be mature by any stretch, but and the height would be between 4.2 and 42 and 60 centimetres high. So perhaps that may be, they would be quite small at being planted.
Microphone.
I would add in this regard that the arboricultural officer has been shown the plans and has removed objection on the basis of the proposal. So that's why we're bringing it in this regard.
Can you, sorry, Fabian, if you speak into your microphones, otherwise the people on the webcast can't hear what you're saying.
Would I be right in thinking, we're thinking it's probably 4.2 and 6 metres rather than 42 and 60 centimetres? It's, yeah, especially with 60.
Yeah, sorry, that's my bad. That's my bad. It's 425 centimetres.
That's more
because
like
I can't read. I do apologise.
We should put a height meter in the corner of this chamber for the amount of times we talk about the heights of things.
So high.
Okay, fabulous. Anybody like to make some comments or questions? You comments, Chris? Do you have a question or comment?
I have a question, clarification.
Okay, can you into the mic?
Yes. You mentioned that there's one parking space per dwelling, yes? Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct.
And where is this?
So there's off-street parking spaces. If I...
Sorry, shouldn't laugh, should I?
It's okay. So can you see on this plan here behind me, there's 6 crosses, and those are the parking spaces there.
That's an awful diagram, if you don't mind my saying so. And even if you do.
But
so could you point them out to me again?
Yeah. There we go. Can you see here 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6?
So they're off-road?
Yes.
Good. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. And the officer's not responsible for the diagram, so I don't think he minds. Okay, anybody got any comments that they would like to make on this particular application? Go on then, Andrew.
I think because in the past I've had a bit of a whinge about the layout and format of some of the reports that we get presented, I would like to comment that I really appreciated the way this report was laid out with the different sections and the explanation of which planning guidelines were being considered in each one. I really like that, although it would have been nice to have had the diagrams with the report for when I was reading the papers, but other than that, I'd just like to commend that.
I second that commendation. Does anybody have any comments about the actual application itself? Go on then, Fabian.
Yeah, I having been to the site visit this morning, I'm quite satisfied that the proposed development is actually a bit further away from the house 2A than the current sort of garage block that's on that bit of the land at the moment. So I think it's a reasonable development. We probably need to condition parking restrictions along that side of the road to deter commuter parking, shall we say. But you know, it's 6 more homes on a site that's at the moment quite derelict. We don't own the land, we don't own the grassland at the front. I would like to see conditions put into about the ecology, particularly because I know we all noticed that it wasn't just grass on there, it was all kinds of wildflowers and stuff, so it'd be nice to try and preserve as much of that as we possibly can. in the development zone ecological report that covers that. I'm sure we could delegate that to you to deal with. But yeah, I'm generally happy with that. This sort of development, I think, is a reasonable size in comparison with the rest of the area.
Great. Can we maybe have a summary at this point of the conditions that are going to be applied to it?
Yes, I will find my report. I was hoping to be able to share it actually. All right. So just going through the conditions quickly. Standard conditions to secure further details of doors and windows. This is design and character conditions. Are you talking about the new ones that we just discussed? Yes. Oh, I do apologise. So I think we're looking at an advice for restricting parking if sort of a zone was introduced. And then we looked at further details regarding the landscaping scheme in an attempt to sort of get a better biodiversity on anything grass that's put down in front of the site. And I think oh yeah, I think that
parking
covers.
zones?
Well, the parking zone would be an advice, wouldn't it? I think.
It would be more of an advice.
Or no permits if a RPZ was brought forward in the area. Yeah, that'd be an advice. This is normally an advice note. And we got one on the final item, so we'll just repeat that.
Okay, fabulous. Does that sound good? Does anybody have any other comments, or are we ready to move to a vote? Go on, Guy.
I have one question, Chair. Apologies for not answering it earlier, but I hadn't noticed it until just a second ago. In one of the items of public forum from Helen Pillinger, I just want to check I get this right. Where is it? There's a suggestion that the site is still designated as being for community use on the council's own maps. I'm guessing that's SharePoint. I was just wondering if you could clarify if that is the case and if that has any implications for this decision.
Yes, it's not designated for community use. There's not that sort of designation on our policy maps, but it has been in historical community use, owing to it being used as St John's Ambulance, and I think there was a small community hall on there as well. And that use ceased in 2016, and the site has been locked and vacant ever since. And the applicant was asked, in line with the relevant policy for loss of community facilities, to demonstrate, to justify that the change of use to residential is acceptable. And the applicant actually provided a list of nearby community facilities to show that there wasn't a shortfall of community facilities that the local residents could use in the area, and so that was accepted.
Are you in a position to share that information with us right now?
I can be. I'll have to find it quickly, but...
Chair, in terms of the community use, because I mean it's covered in key issue 1 in the report at the start. We look at the issue of flag that this would be residential development of a site that in the past has been in local community use.
There is supporting documentation that shows a list of if you bear with me, I'll try and find it now. One moment.
Yeah, I think it'd be good, Gary, if we just make sure we do have a little quick look at that.
Sorry, there's been a few applications on site, so I'm actually trying to find it still.
Whilst we're waiting, does anybody have anything that they'd like to say, or we could do some sing a song? Chris.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I have to say that I'm really appalled at this application on this site. I'm very familiar with it. My wife worked at the hospital for a number of years. I'm aware of all the parking problems that there are around that hospital. And they were foreseen by some of us. I happened to be on the panel that looked at the original design plans for the hospital. The fact that there are insufficient parking spaces for staff and for visitors, and let's not forget that people that are going to the hospital are people who possibly may have walking difficulties or some form of ambulatory problem, and they need to be able to go there by car. Now, if they can afford a taxi, that's fine, but that's assuming that they can afford a taxi, and I know there's an awful lot of people that can't. People in my ward, for instance, could never walk it, even if they were totally capable of walking. It would be far too far. There is a terrible parking problem around the whole area. If you displace any parking for whatever reason, then it's going to spread it even further. It's going to be very, very difficult to justify saying yes to this application to the residents, particularly in Tilling Road. Tilling Road's a dreadful road. You avoid it if you possibly can, if you're coming from the hospital or going to the hospital. But I had to use it at the beginning of this week. There was a vehicle, a large vehicle, that was either unloading or loading up something in Dorian Road, and the road was blocked because there was a bus had come down the other way, which couldn't get through, and it was impossible to get round it. I went up Tilling Road, big mistake. Tilling Road is not designed for it or built for it. So I cannot see why we are even examining this. To me, it's a non-starter. I have to say, there is no way I would vote for it. I think we should say no, I really do. We're not being helpful to the people that work in the hospital, the people that have to visit the hospital, and the people that live all around that area. So it's a no from me, I'm afraid. It's totally inappropriate in my view.
Thank you very much.
I'm really sorry. I'm trying to look for it now. I know I have seen it because it's just, it came in at pre-app. So the principle of change of use was established at that stage. So I haven't revisited it. There is a document. I'll find it now if you're willing to wait.
Okay, thank you very much. Any other comments on it? Okay. We'll just wait a moment longer. Guy.
Could I cheekily ask another question?
Let's fill the time. Go for it, but don't make it a complicated one.
Just glancing at the equalities assessment, and I'm just wondering, I'll address this question to Gary whilst the planning officer's looking at other things. The proximity of the hospital and the likely demographic profiles of the users of the hospital, people more likely to be elderly and more likely to be disabled, and certainly given Southmead's maternity unit, more likely to be pregnant. I'm just wondering if that does create a bit of an obligation, given the proximity of the site to the hospital, to consider some of that in this development.
I think we're alive to that. The way this is a balance between impact on local conditions like parking, as Councillor Windows was talking about, and but that's got to be balanced against the benefits of bringing forward a site for housing as well. Also, you've got to apply the parking standards to the scheme as well. And I believe, looking at Matthew 6 is compliant with the standard. So essentially the development is kind of swallowing its own smoke in terms of its impact on the local area in terms of vehicle use, because through the local plan we've set a standard and the development meets it. So we have no grounds whatsoever to kind of challenge that and say, oh, we want more, because the impact of the development is going to be on local roads, which then may disproportionately have an impact on specific groups. So I would say, in line with our own policies, the parking impacts of the scheme, you know, are fine. You know, they meet the standards that we set out a long time ago.
I'm very sorry about that. So just this is the list that was provided to show that there are nearby community halls and uses within, you know, reasonable distance of the area. And so in terms of the change of use, if that can be provided, then there's no demonstration that that was a vital community facility. And the fact that it had been closed for, I think, up to 4, 5, 6 years or so now, 7 years perhaps even, and then sort of closed and shut off, means that we accepted the principle of change of use to residential, given it's an overwhelmingly residential area in this instance.
Okay, thank you very much for finding that information. Brilliant. Okay, oh, Philippa, I'm afraid you can't actually get involved in this bit, frustrating as that is. Okay, any more comments, or shall we move to a vote? Did you want to respond to our new information guy? Okay, shall we move to a vote? Okay, so officer recommendation to approve. We've moved that. Do I have a seconder? Andrew. Okay, I'll take a roll call of people's votes. I'll start with Lorraine. In favour or against? Okay, can you say it into the mic?
This shouldn't I? Abstain.
Okay, thank you. Chris?
Against.
Leslie?
Against.
Andrew?
For.
Guy?
For.
Katya?
For, but I do hope they keep the trees.
Fabian?
For, but wanting the ecological survey done as well.
Exactly, and hopefully some trees also for. Thank you very much. So that is approved. Thank you very much, everybody. We'll take a 10-minute comfort break and we'll restart at past with the next application. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So this is an apology, really. So the next we should have been considering a proposal at the formal Greville elderly persons home in Lacey Road in Stockwood. So the report was prepared. No doubt members of the committee would have read the report. So my apologies for you having wasted your time on doing that for today. The reason for that is that I was informed late yesterday that we appeared to have, by genuine error, not consulted two adjoining households to the site. Now, subsequently, I think it was pointed out that we've had comments from those addresses on the application, but to be honest, the fact that we hadn't actively notified them of the application was a risk that I wasn't prepared to take, really. So I thought, to be perfectly safe, to regrettably withdraw it from the agenda today. So the next steps on that are to notify those neighbours and triple check that actually happens, and then that enables us to bring the application back to your next meeting. So apologies for that, but ultimately your reading of the report won't be wasted because you'll be considering the application in 6 weeks' time.
Brilliant, thank you very much. And so with that, we'll move on to our fourth item agenda, which is 122 Bath Road. First person I have to speak is Stuart Rackham. So up to the mic and 1 minute, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair. Is that on? Can you hear me okay? Perfect, thank you. Thank you, Chair, members. We have, as a development team, we've worked collaboratively and positively with your planning and urban design officers to reach this position where a positive recommendation has been made on the basis of it being in accordance with your development plan. Prior to the submission of the application and during its determination, we've discussed the proposal with the local community, including neighbours, the Thunderbolt pub, local residents and residents groups. The changes made have led to the scheme receiving significantly more support for the proposal than originally submitted. We acknowledge there are still concerns and it's not 100% supported. This rarely happens. However, the remaining concerns relate to the height and sustainability. Sustainability, we are more than double the policy requirements, so we are in accordance with your development plan. The height provides a balance between reflecting the character, appearance and height of this part of Totterdown, particularly the 4.5 stories, including roof, terrace, to the east of the site on Bath Road. So the height, terrace nature, pitched roof are therefore part of the Totterdown context. This proposal balances the objectives of delivering a policy-compliant number of affordable houses and ensuring this eyesore of a site is redeveloped to provide desperately needed open market and affordable housing.
Could you draw it to your close, please?
So therefore, just simply request that you endorse the officer recommendation and grant permission. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Okay, next we have Suzanne Audrey, who I can't see is here right now. Okay, and this print out, weirdly, I think it says Tony Mullen.
Good afternoon, members of the committee. My name's Tony Mullen and I'm a partner at Oxford Architects, the Bristol office of Oxford Architects. I would like to take this opportunity to offer clarification over some concern relating to context, height and wider views of Totterdown raised in the committee statements submitted by Tressa and one other person recently. The proportions of any building, its height, scale and massing, are determined by the context of the site, dovetailing successfully with the prevailing planning policy. In relation to the street frontage and height of our proposals, the scheme has been designed in accordance with this UL SPD policy. When adjudged against these criteria, it then allows new development to be between 4 and 7 stories in height in this area. Our proposal is therefore permissible and compliant under this policy, and that's a really important point. In relation to potential harmful impact on views towards the Totterdown escarpment, the verified views submitted show that these views are indeed protected and will not be harmed. I hope these clarifications are helpful. Finally, we'd like to take this opportunity to thank the planning and urban design officers in particular for their assistance and support throughout the application process, culminating in the scheme that you see before you today. We now seek your support for their recommendation for approval also. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Helena Moldova-Vine? No? Okay. Is everybody who thinks they were going to speak on this now spoken? Yes? Good. Great. Okay, also over to Jess for the officer presentation, please.
Good afternoon, everybody. I think a lot of you will know this site. It's a very prominent site just on the entrance of the Bath Road, and I've just got a few photographs of it to remind you. It's historically a petrol filling station. It's been used for car-related activities for the last few years. So that's it there. That's the view of the rear entrance of County Street, and you can see the development taking place on the old Esso site opposite at the moment. And then next door to the site, you've got the Grade 2 listed Thunderbolt Inn, which is a live music venue. There's been a history of planning consents for residential on the site. More recently, in the consultation draft of the revised local plan in March 2019, it was allocated for residential as well. Now, the proposal that we see before us today is a resubmission of an application that was first submitted last July, and I'll show you what we had initially. It was a building that was 7, 8, 9 stories high, and I think there was general consensus from us, from Design West, and the numerous objectors to the scheme that this was overscaled and inappropriate. We subsequently have come now down to the scheme as we have before us, which is 3, 4 and 5 stories, and you'll see that the upper floor is slightly recessed, ground floor setback as well, and a mixture of railings and wall actually along the frontage. As far as the accommodation being proposed, this is the ground floor. We've got 31 units. They are all dual aspect. They're all compliant with national described space standards. We've got all 2-bed units aside from 4 3-bed and 4 1-bed units. They're all designed to be wheelchair adaptable, and that we're looking at 30% affordable housing, which would be secured by a legal agreement. And as far as the energy provision within the development is concerned, looking at a centralised air source heat pump system, which pumps water around the development, with each unit having individual controls over what there is. And to the rear, there's a communal garden area which will be planted up, and the roof to the plant room will be a brown roof. And there is a biodiversity net gain assessment that has come in with this. And actually, because at the moment it's sort of basically bare concrete with a few weeds around the edge, it would be a substantial gain on that. Right. And the other thing I was going to actually mention before I move on to the key areas of concern that have been raised by objectors, but also in the statements that were submitted. One of the development considerations in the draft allocation relates to the turnpike and potential conflict with noise generated during live music events. And because of that, there's been a full noise assessment undertaken with readings taken while the Thunderbolt was having a music event last November, and taken throughout the night. And the findings from that are that actually the main ambient noise that this development will experience is actually still from the road, but the noise from the music will provide background noise. But the assessment recommends that, provided the construction of the walls, windows and roof are such to reach a certain standard, then, and there's trickle vent assuming trickle vents for ventilation, then those units that are nearest to the inn and may be affected, there'll be a satisfactory internal noise environment. Right, so to turn to, I think, the key areas, I was going to go to the impact on neighbours first. And we've got some scaled cross-sections showing the nearest houses at the rear to the proposed development, the intervening distance between these houses and the proposal. At the lowest are 20 metres, but that goes to 26 and 30. And where there's 20, that's where you can just about see the larger trees at the back of the site. That's where those are located. Now, alluded to the sort of the guidelines in the BRE, guidelines for sunlight and daylight assessment, and in accordance with that, sort of, if you take a 25-degree line from the midpoint of the sort of the key living space, which is a ground floor patio door on these units, you can see that it goes across the top of the proposal, and thereby, there will be satisfactory daylight retained. Distance, and I'll pass on to the next one as well, because that shows again at the other end of the development similar happening. Distance wise, that generally is considered to offset any impact on privacy. Has been comment about the balconies proposed on the rear of this. However, they are designed so they provide a screen to views out, and the agent has provided some photos of similar types of balconies that have been used successfully on other developments, and so we feel that sort of addresses the light and the privacy issues for neighbours, although they will of course see the development. To go to height, we've already heard from the agent and the architect about height. It says 3, 4, 5 stories, and I think as officers, the general feeling is that in this location and this prominent part of Bath Road, it's appropriate here. As you can see, they're using double height bays, triple height bays to actually break up and create a rhythm along with the roof form as well. And the other aspect, which I shall just actually go through these and leave you with one maybe, that's the relationship to the listed building. And I think if I could just actually dwell on that just for a minute. Again, that was something which, in the context of the applications first submitted, it was a concern from Design West, and they felt that the development would just be overwhelming on this building. And I think now, with the 3-storey, I think that brings it down to a scale that's acceptable. There's no doubt that the view, as you go east along Bath Road, you will not have the same views of the pub, of the inn. However, whatever meaningful development takes place on this site, that will be the case. It's only been so visible since that site was cleared and been used as a filling station. And the other aspect, which I know has received comment, is the highway side of things. And I think before we look at the parking provision, I think it's necessary to say that it's in a highly sustainable location. It's on a main bus route, frequent bus service in and out of town, cycle lane, beg your pardon, easy walking distance, Temple Meads, local facilities, Wells Road. And so it's an area that we should be encouraging alternative modes of transport to the car. The proposal includes policy compliant cycle parking, so that's 62 secure covered spaces, visitor cycle parking to the front. As far as the car parking is concerned, it is only 11. There are 2 disabled spaces, 2 charging points, though they do state that the actual car park will be cabled in a way so more charging points could be added at a later date should it be required. To get a feel of whether or not that's an acceptable level, they provided some information based on the average car ownership in the Windmill Hill ward, which is about 51%. And based on that, you'd be looking at about 15 cars on this site, need for 15 car spaces. We'd only have 11, there's not space for more. And so following from that, the transport consultants acting for the applicant undertook a car parking survey of the area and found within reasonable walking distance on a space over 3 days that was available of an evening. So if there was some overflow demand for car parking, it is available. But as I say, I think we're backing up. We've got fully compliant cycle parking. There will be a residential travel plan in place. The applicants have indicated that they want to pay a contribution to enable Bristol City Council to undertake that on their behalf. And I think we need to do what we can to keep the car usage low on this, particularly in the interests of sort of the air pollution in the area. So we are recommending approval of the scheme, subject to a Section 106 to cover contributions towards the travel plan, but also to introduce some waiting restrictions on key points around the back and the entrance, so cars can flow easily in and out without being obstructed, and also the creation of a concrete apron at the nearby bus stop, which will stop it rutting and make it suitable, in the long term for cycling use. That's our recommendation. We'd like delegated powers to finalise all the conditions and agree those pre-commencement conditions as appropriate with the applicant. Thank you.
Fabulous. Thank you very much. Well done. Questions? Andrew?
Just for the avoidance of doubt, when you say, when you talk about the putting in the concrete at the bus stop, it's a bus stop that's opposite Totterdown Bridge that's in question, is that right?
I think it's the nearest one to the site on that side of the road.
Which would be that one, yeah?
Yeah.
I've got a question about access to the car park. Is that through the rear of the site? Is that...
That's a very good question. Yes, so basically the access comes off County Street at the rear, and that will be gated, and the illustrations in the design and access state actually show that that might actually be a source of some sort of public art feature on that. So the access will go in through that, and then you can see that the actual accommodation is laid out, so there are actually 4 cores, and so either stairs or by lift, and you go up through the rear, and there'll be 2 flats served off each core on each floor.
Yeah, so I was just having a little look on Google Maps. What's the... Because it's at the access out the back is outside of the application area, so but it doesn't seem to be a street.
It is. It's an adopted road.
It's an adopted road.
Yes, County Street goes up. It's if I go back to the photographs, there is a picture there. That's it.
Yeah.
And so one of the conditions will be seeking an upgrading of that road, with it being lit as well. And as I say, that's where we'll have waiting restrictions, so people can there'll be free passage in and out without obstruction.
And about cars parking on it and that sort of thing?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, brilliant, thank you very much. Any other, Fabian and Andrew?
I was just, you want delegated powers about conditions. I want to make sure that agent of change is definitely going to be one of them if we give this the go ahead. Absolutely critical. I mean, I noticed that the Thunderbolt's owner has supported this application, but I think it's absolutely critical that they are protected as they were here first, as a business.
So the agent of change has to be applied during the assessment of the application, because that will then establish whether the relationship between the existing development here, the Thunderbolt, in its current operation, and the proposed residential development is acceptable. So this is where, in particular, the noise reports have been done, and the noise mitigation for future residents has to be be clear. So that assessment in itself, we feel, has discharged the agent of change principle, to the extent that it's really good to see in the public forum statements the operators of the Thunderbolt welcoming the new developments, because quite often when housing, is proposed, in a compact city like ours, quite often, understandably, cultural venues will worry about that and be concerned. But it seems to me there's been good engagement, and both parties are happy with the situation. So I think in those circumstances, I don't think we need to do any more in terms of controls. I think that assessment has been applied through the consideration of the application.
Yeah. And can I say that we'd be, one of the conditions I think we'd be proposing, probably a pre-commencement one, was full details of the sound installation for this development, to make sure that in line with the recommendations in the noise assessment. So that's one thing that we'd make sure that we had in place right when the actual detailed design work of the scheme was underway.
Okay, thanks. Second question is, obviously that garage it's been there for a while, but is there any record of what was there before the car wash that was then a garage?
In the design and access statement, there are some photographs, basically Victorian, quite high Victorian terrace buildings. What use they're in, I don't actually know. I mean, one of the, again, pre-commencement conditions on this they've already done some work, some investigations into the contamination, given that it was a filling station. We understand that the petrol tanks have been decommissioned, but that will need to be looked at on site with boreholes, and following on from that, they'll be able to finalise what the drainage approach is going to be appropriate.
Sure. I was just wondering, you said there were photos. I mean, they don't seem to be any on our report.
No, there aren't. Sorry, there aren't. I didn't put one on the report, but in the actual background papers with the actual application, in the design and access statement, there is a couple of photographs from Victorian times.
Oh, right. Thank you very much.
I've also just looked it up, Fabian, on Know Your Place, and it was, in fact, it was terraced houses. And, of course, a lot of that area was built up much more before it was taken down for the ring road that never happened. Yeah, so it was occupied previously. Andrew, then Guy.
Yeah, it's worth looking up some of those old photos. They're all very picturesque, although the living conditions might not have been quite as picturesque as we imagine now. I was going to ask a question about the diagram on page 110, which is one of the cross sections. So it's the one that's at the top there. Just for absolute clarity, the building that is on the right shaded, that's effectively number 1 Stanley Hill, which will have been the building that was in the previous picture. It was a converted sort of converted office into a house.
That is one of the houses at the back, because 1 Stanley Hill, actually, as it looks over the site, all the rear windows are all obscure glazed, and they have very little outlook from the back at present. This is one of the houses, actually. There's the terrace of houses along.
So that's Hillside.
That's the one, yeah. Yeah, because they are the ones that at the moment look out across the site, and the way that they're arranged, as I'm sure you know, they're sort of cut into the side of the house. So actually on the road, you've got the kitchen and the bedrooms looking out onto the road, and as you go down, you've actually got sort of quite a key living space on the ground floor looking towards the site, which is why we've asked for these sort of diagrams to sort of illustrate what the outlook would be for them. I mean, as they stand, they are north facing, so the actual impact on sunlight will be negligible, but it's the daylight that is obviously of most interest, therefore.
So the the Stanley Hill ones aren't in that diagram, and they're not a consideration because I thought at least 2 of the ones in that block did have windows on that side, but you're saying that it's sort of opaqued.
If you have a look at the back, if you look into that, they're all. I mean, because I have to confess, I didn't look right into the history of that, but I assumed it was an office conversion. It looks as if it was, But it's to say, at the back as it faces the site, they're all quite heavily opaque.
Okay, thank you.
Lorraine.
Right. Hello. Just a couple of questions, actually, if you don't mind. You mentioned in your presentation about affordable housing being 30%, but you made no mention to social housing because I'm just new to the game.
Sorry. Yeah, affordable housing, and what we'd be looking for is a policy compliance split. So 77% of that would be social rent, with the remainder being some sort of usually shared equity. And that'll be 9 units in total. And our colleagues in the strategic housing team will liaise with the developer as to what size units that they think would be appropriate in this location and where they might be. And it may be that what they indicated is they may actually be looking for like a bit of a cluster, because obviously from a management perspective, whichever registered provider works with the developer, that might work well. And I was going to say something else then. but essentially externally it'll be tenure blind. You won't know which door's which.
Okay. My second question was that you mentioned about the balconies, and you said that the developers have current housing stock where they have used the design that they're proposing for this site, but we can't. Have you got pictures of those? That development that they're talking about?
Yeah, it's not their development per se, but it is examples of other developments in place with similarly designed balconies. And in fact, one of them is actually a city council development in a back in a garage site in Henbury, which actually won a civic award. I can find. I mean, I can't actually find the photos because I've got access to the application at the moment on my system, but they're slatted and quite a light in appearance, but they do. I mean, the ones in the Henbury site, they're actually closer than in this instance, and they can do work and they can look quite nice.
Okay. The next, sorry, I'll get there.
No, please.
The next one was about, there's a couple of words, nothing major. How long, I'm not saying in any particular order either, just how much of a disruption and how long would the planning take if it was to go ahead?
I'm looking at it. Any idea?
Yeah, I would say between 12 and 14 months. Okay, so we can add a bit to that, okay, because that's gonna just.
Yeah, I mean, one of the conditions that we'd be looking for is for a construction management plan to try and offset particularly impact on the highway from heavy vehicles. So I mean, it's obviously going to have some implication. It can't not, but try to its timing of deliveries and also hours of operation on the site, thinking in terms of the existing residential neighbours that are present close to the site as well.
And will there be sort of like I'm going to say dust sheets, but you know what I mean? Is there going to be some kind of way to mitigate?
I think within a construction management plan, you would normally be looking for some sort of information about what was proposed about dust, repressing dust, whether that was going to be spraying. I mean, as far as this, because you're not actually demolishing very much on the site, although you will be probably getting rid of the concrete base, the amount of dust might not be as great, if you were taking down a large building on a site, but it would certainly be something that would be built in, and we'd want some information about, if it were an issue, what would they do?
Yeah. And finally, you're saying that you're reducing the capacity for cars to just 11. to sort of comply with, you know, our clean air zones, etc. But that doesn't stop people from having cars. So I just want to say that because people.
No, I know, and we are aware of this.
And also, how many bike hubs are you going to put in as well?
There's 62 cycle spaces, which is compliant with our adopted policy, and there's a couple of cycle parking spaces to the front as well for people visiting the site. So that's the maximum, and that's what we'd want. And as I say, the actual car spaces there will be 2 electric vehicle charging points, but it will be designed in a way that more can be put in at a later date should the demand be there.
Okay, thank you very much.
So it's kind of, I noticed that there's no doors from the bike stores out to the back of the build either, which means cyclists are always going to have to go out onto the Bath Road rather than ever being able to go out the back. We can still see it up behind you, or is it stuck?
I know, it's stuck. I will check that, but I'd be very surprised if there wasn't an opportunity for access to the rear. I mean, I think most people will, with their bikes, go out at the front, but there should certainly be access to the rear as well. Sorry, it's died on me.
Yeah, no, which is the slide? It's
wait a minute, there we go.
Slide 8. So there's
Yes, I've got you.
So you've got the disabled space in the way where you put the door, probably going backwards, and then.
I think the issue for the bicycle store is it backs onto proposed car spaces, and so you wouldn't want to go out directly onto them, and so it would be a question of going out and then cutting through that entrance core to the rear.
Which could be a bit off-putting to some people. Okay, any other questions? Philippa, then Katja.
Hi, it's just two small questions. One is about the energy. So I know there's air source heat pumps. Are there no photovoltaics, solar panels?
There is, again, within the documentation with the application, there is information about the system that they propose to use. And it's essentially, it's air source heat pumps which will generate, it's like a loop of ambient temperature water that goes through all the flats. And as I say, each will have their own control over their heating from that. It sort of looks like a bit like a fridge, if you like, from the illustrations and the photographs available. So it is in with the background papers with the application, but no, I didn't include it.
As actually meaning electricity for, you know, like washing machines and all the other uses of electricity, rather than for heating.
Do you mean solar panels on the roof?
No PV. I don't know if you want to.
Yeah, sorry, we can't
Sorry.
start.
I'm sorry. I'm not sure what the answer is for that. But as I say, we've got the heating will produce. I mean, there will have to be electricity within the units, evidently. But the main, energy for the hot water and for your heating will come from a renewable source within the development.
But are there solar panels on the roof? That's what we're trying to.
No, there aren't.
Okay.
They're not.
No.
So that's no. No. Okay.
And my other question was just, could you go to the final picture in the presentation, please? Sorry.
The final page of the presentation.
Yeah, that one. Oh, sorry. Am I right that the development is it sort of like right in the middle of that picture?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. Thank you. I just wanted to, I wasn't quite sure. Thank
No,
you.
no, these are visually verified, you know, illustrations that they've produced. So.
Thank you. Thanks.
Then it was Katja.
I had the same question as Philippa.
Great minds. Okay. Andrew, I think, was waving. No? Yes? No? Any more questions? Andrew.
I mean, just on that one, just to clarify that, this is this first stretch where you can see that there's the internal lane and then the bus lane to the left-hand side. The site is beyond that, so it's probably about where that three cars back. i.e. it's not to the right-hand side; it's further back in that picture.
Yeah, it's more or less central to the picture. You can see the grey steam standing roof.
Does that make clear? Is that clear? Yep. Good. Great. Fabian, one last from you, and then we'll move on.
Just very quickly, would we be able to condition solar PV on the roof?
Yes, you can really. It's a bit surprising that there isn't any PV on the scheme, but I feel it would be a reasonable condition to add a requirement for a, policy compliant 20% PV on the site. There might be some practical issues around that. I wouldn't know what they would be at first sight, but it'd be a condition that should committee wish to add it, then technically you could add that.
And if we can always report back and let you know what the outcome, if there was an issue with it, and let you know, and put it down as a condition for now. And at your next meeting, I can ask Gary to report back.
Yeah, probably at the agenda meeting, save us another report on the main meeting, but we'll certainly come back to the party spokes.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Yeah.
Fabulous. And then just for absolute clarification, for agent of change, have we missed the window to be able to do anything about that now?
Well, I think as Gary said, that the actual noise assessment that has been undertaken was taken, the noise readings were drawn when there was a live event on at the Thunderbolt, and the recommendations from the consultants who did that was basically, provided the construction of the building is to to a certain specification, and the windows are such that there will be a satisfactory noise environment internally for those units that are closest to the pub.
I think, Chair, because of the satisfactory relationship between the two developments, because of the work that has been done, I think we're in a position where if, say, the Thunderbolt wanted to change the way they operated, that would just understandably fall within the licensing regime primarily, and that would be a new, so they would then become the agent of change in a way, in that they would be expanding their operation, and that would have to be assessed through licensing. So you probably wouldn't need a planning application unless there were outdoor structures and things like that. I think maybe the words on the tip of your tongue, maybe deed of easement. I think though that was applied in the Silverthorne Lane situation, I think in a very different situation where you've got a nightclub in that area, generates a lot of noise in that area, but it's operating lawfully. But the more residential that comes in near it, then you need to strike that balance between allowing the housing to take place whilst allowing the cultural venue to still operate within its licence as well. So I think in that case, the deed of easement condition was applicable. There's another case in mind around Old Market where I think the same may well apply as well, because I think the two parties, in terms of the housing developers and the cultural venues, are quite a distance apart in terms of agreeing what the way forward is. Here, I think, and as evidenced in the public forum statement, I think it's a much better situation, and that the relationship between the two uses seems fine. So I think a deed of easement condition in this case, I don't think it would meet the test, because I don't think it's necessary given the assessment that's been carried out.
I think where my concern comes from is sort of future-proofing things, because whilst it might be assessed as being suitable noise levels for residents, we can never sort of anticipate quite what each individual resident that then moves in sort of actual view of a sort of acceptable level. I know I have it as a city centre councillor, I'm sure many of my colleagues also do, people moving into a place where there's been a long-standing venue and then discovering actually they can't quite tolerate it, and future-proofing it in terms of protecting the current owner of the Thunderbolt and whoever may take it on in the future as well. I'd be very keen to explore that more so that we don't actually get tensions in the future where we could have actually solved it at this stage.
Yes, Chair. I think it's a matter of judgment, really, how much control we want to apply to the situation, really. So, yeah, it's in your gift to add such a condition if you wanted to. I just, in the circumstances, I think it might be a bit excessive, but it's over to yourselves as a committee.
Well, I personally would quite like to. So, if anybody else would like to speak in favour of that, I'd be grateful.
This is to add the agent of change protection condition. Yeah, I'd support that with the PV.
Yeah.
Have we got to the discussion or have we done that?
No, but we can move into the discussion now.
Okay,
yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. Good. Any comments generally? Lorraine?
I got just one more question.
You got one? Yeah, go for it.
Sorry.
That's fine.
Page 115. I just sat here reading it and I was just thinking, because there was quite a few objections from the local community, and I'm talking sort of in an ideal scenario, and some of the objections sort of sit with who's going to live there, whether the housing will be end up being rented on, secondly, and lots of, issues about who's going to live there, etc. I don't know if you can build in sort of provisos, some buildings, you can't rent it, you've got to live in it, that type of setup. I just say, off the top of my head, yeah. Or the flip side of that is whether some of these have been addressed, the concerns by residents. Am I allowed to answer that?
And sorry, what page number was that?
115. 115.
150. That's in the next item. That's,
am I in the wrong place?
Yeah, that's Oak Road. Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
That's a proposed HMO. So.
Right, that everybody.
Yeah.
We'll stick a pin in that and come back to that comment later.
Yeah, I'm going to answer that question in a minute.
Very keen. It's great. Okay, so we'll move on to comments and discussion.
Scroll down to
Andrew and then Fabian.
So yeah, as I mentioned earlier, I former resident of Totterdown. You can just about see my former house in that picture. So it was very, very difficult to bite my tongue when and not do any prejudging when the previous proposals for this site came forward and whatnot. And I've got a couple of concerns. I mean, I note the site height has come down dramatically, which is welcome because the previous proposals were tremendously out of scale, notwithstanding the tower that has been built on the other side of the road. But I do have two major concerns, or two concerns still. One is the height. I think 5 stories is just a touch too high and 4 stories would be preferable, but I think I'm willing to concede that we can't win everything that we want in this life, far less in this committee. The other is to do with transport and access, and there's long-running problems within that part of Totterdown with rat running between the Welsh Road and the Bath Road, and access and particularly for this site, because it will be on the Bath Road, but unless you're coming from the Bristolington direction, you'll have to access it from the Welsh Road, because there's no right turn as you head out of town into the New Walls development. So I do have concern about the implications for traffic, for residents, both in the new block and in the existing housing. But I know the local councils are alive to that, and I'm sure we'll be considering SIL funding, etc., to try and alleviate that. So I think, notwithstanding my concerns, I'll be supporting the application.
Yeah, I think the design's actually grown on me. I think it's it's the Thunderbolt next door is happy with it. So I'll be subject to Councillor Stafford Townsend's proposed condition about protecting the agent of change side of things and absolutely protecting the Thunderbolt, and a condition on solar PV, which I think is, I think it's a no-brainer to do that. I'm more than happy to support the recommendation, subject to those 2 additional conditions.
I think I feel the same as Fabian about those 2 conditions, but there's one thing, it might just be the picture on page 122, because it was taken in winter and the trees are really drab, and the picture over there shows them really, really green, and maybe it's because of the presentation we saw earlier, but the building seems very not green, and I mean that by planting. I know it's got a biodiversity increase because of what it was before, but it feels like the balconies or something should have something green on them. But maybe that's for the residents, I don't know.
Are we able to add any extra conditions for any extra landscaping type stuff?
We'll be asking for large-scale details, a fully worked-up landscaping scheme by condition. We've got an indicative landscape scheme which shows the species type and some trees in the back, and certainly along the frontage where the wall and the railings are proposed, there is a specific, quite a deep area there that will be planted up, so there will be some greening onto the frontage, onto the road frontage.
Brilliant. Yeah, because I think visually it could do with some softening. Okay, brilliant. So are we happy to move to a vote with the conditions of...
Yeah. Can I propose it with those 2 additional conditions?
Yes, exactly. Unless anybody has a burning desire to say anything else. Guy, you keep making me faces.
Sorry, which 2? Is one of them the solar PV?
So one of them solar panels, one of them is agent of change. Yes? Deed of easement. Yeah.
Deed of easement, yeah.
Deed of easement. Yes. Brilliant. Okay, let's move to a vote. Fabian is seconding it, or you're proposing it?
I'll propose it.
You're proposing it. Anybody want to second it? Go on then, Andrew. Brilliant. Okay, so we'll do a roll call again. We'll start with Lorraine. Or I can start off the other side, if you like. I'll start at the other side. Fabian.
4.
Katja.
4.
Philippa.
4.
Guy.
4.
Andrew.
4.
Leslie. Oh, into the mic.
4.
Fabulous, thank you. Chris.
4.
Lorraine.
I will concur.
Which I believe is a 4.
Voice would make a
and
difference.
a 4 from me as well, please. So that's unanimous. Thank you very much. Thank you everybody for attending. We'll let you move on, and then we'll move on to the next item. Thank you very much. Thank you, Jess. Okay, rolling on to our last exciting agenda item, we have 21 Oak Road. Our first speaker is Nigel Green, please. Speaking to the mic, you have 1 minute. Lorraine? Where you go? Do you need us to, no? Do you need a, are you sure? Because we can. Okay, all right. Don't do that to me. Right, okay. As you were, carry on.
Professional people. I've read all the consultation replies, and the replies have helped shape the proposals in front of you today. I and my planning agent work rigorously with the case of site transport pollution and control office to address consultation replies. I very much appreciate concerns over parking. We've carried out a parking survey of the area in full accordance with Bristol City Council and parking methodology, and your transport officer is satisfied there is sufficient parking to accommodate 2 spaces for the HMO, the same as the permitted current development.
Sorry, could you move slightly closer to the mic? Because I think people are having trouble hearing you.
Oh, okay. I'm aware it is challenging for young professionals to find good quality affordable housing in Bristol, and the Airbnb market has driven up rental rates. Young professionals neither afford nor necessarily want to live alone in 1-bedroom flats and studios at inflated rents. In my experience, they want to be part of a community in attractive, safe, walkable environments with great transport needs. I believe in a mix of balanced communities, and I believe young professionals deserve the opportunity to live here. I'd like to add that we follow the full principles of the 20-minute neighbourhood as well, so thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, Councillor Emma Edwards, please.
As you've probably seen, there's lots and lots and lots of objections on this HMO, and I have got a statement here that was written by a few of the residents together. I'm not going to read the whole thing because it's going to be longer than a minute, but needless to say, there is big concerns about parking in the parking survey. Not only is there no residents parking, therefore it's already very, very squashing. There's also a garage business on the road, so that also adds to that pressure. There's also some confusion, which I'm hoping will be addressed later, about the amount of HMOs in the area and the sandwiching situation, because there are some sort of unlicensed or unregistered ones. So from the residents, just to say that having lived here for over 30 and 20 years respectively, we have seen the decline of the street from what was once a friendly community, spirited place to what it is now. A place of increasing numbers of transitory people who quite rightly just want to get on with their lives with little involvement from other residents. However, for the long-term residents like ourselves, it feels like relentless erosion of our quality of life and environment. As mentioned earlier, some have already had enough and left. We ask that members take seriously the concerns raised by the community who live here and make a decision that they would be willing to live with or next to themselves. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And then we'll move to the officer presentation. Again, you have the slides in your inbox. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. So this application relates to a property at 21 Oak Road in the Bishopston ward. The rear of the property backs onto commercial properties along Gloucester Road. The property has recently been extended following planning permission for a ground floor extension and roof conversion to allow 2 further bedrooms. So the property is now a 4-bedroom dwelling. The application seeks a change of use from a residential dwelling to a 5-bedroom HMO for up to 6 people. The total occupancy has been reduced during the course of the application from 8 to 6. If I bring up the site location map, the property is located on the west side of Oak Road, the rear of which backs onto Gloucester Road, which is a designated town centre. The street is terraced with waste and recycling stored usually within the small front courtyards of the properties, and there is no off-street parking available on the street. The property is close to the shops and amenities offered by Gloucester Road and is close to bus stops with regular services into and out of the city centre. If I bring up some site photos, here you can see the satellite image of the application site with the roof extension and rear extension, and then the bottom left is a recent image on Google, and the bottom next to that to the right is a site visit photo. So the reason for the call-in, the application was called in by Councillor Edwards due to concerns about parking, disruption to the street and neighbourhood at large, and the large number of objections that we've received. I think the key reasons have been mentioned there and are in the report. So, aware of time, I will move through that. There have been a total of 277 objections from 233 contributors. 214 of those came in from the initial consultation of 46 properties, and then following reconsultation on the reduced scheme, 61 were received. There have been a further 2 objections since the submission of the officer's report. Again, we've had 2 representations in favour, one of which being from the applicant. So the key issues, there are 3 key issues here. The first of which is the principle of conversion of the property to an HMO. The Council adopted a new SPD for HMOs in November 2020. This document, the Managing the Development of HMOs, set out the parameters in which HMOs are or are not acceptable in planning terms. In terms of the location, these are assessed based on the concentration of HMOs in an area and the potential sandwiching effect on single dwellings. In this instance, the calculation uses up-to-date council records for properties that have planning permission and or an HMO licence. This data is updated quarterly, and in this instance, there are 7.78% of properties in use as an HMO within 100 metres of the application property. This is below the 10% threshold, which would suggest a harmful concentration. The way in which the percentage of HMOs is measured is set out in the SPD as the total identified dwellings are based on residential records held within the Bristol Local Land and Property Gazetteer and include all residential classifications but exclude garages, residential car parks and provisional records. So the total identified dwellings in use as an HMO includes all HMOs including properties with a mandatory licence or an additional licence in areas where additional licensing schemes have been declared, and all planning permissions and other authorisations for HMOs that are not licensed. These datasets are updated quarterly, so according to our adopted policy, the application is compliant with regard to the concentration of HMOs and the sandwiching effect at this time. And there's a map of the verified HMOs in the immediate area. In addition, the property does not sandwich any neighbouring properties between HMOs. So according to policy, again, there is no reason to refuse the application on the principle of development. Turning to parking, it is acknowledged that there is significant parking pressure in the locality of the application site, as there is in much of the city. This was apparent during an officer site visit, although there were parking spaces available at that time. A parking survey was requested from the applicant, and the parameters were agreed in advance by the applicant and the Transport Development Management Officer. Following the completion of the survey, it was concluded that there would likely be minimal difference in parking terms between the property being used as a large family home of 4 bedrooms or as a 5-bedroom HMO. It should also be noted that, as with family dwellings, not all people living in HMOs have cars, and it is impossible to regulate how many vehicles residents of a property can own. Whilst there is no residential parking scheme currently in place, should one be introduced, the property would not be eligible for parking permits, as the change of use would occur after the cut-off date of 2018, as set by the transport team. With regards to other transport issues, the application provides secure parking for all occupants of the property and sufficient waste and recycling storage. The property is approximately 100 metres from a key bus stop with routes running into and out of the city centre, and this should encourage occupants to use sustainable transport. Car ownership does remain a choice, and if there is severe parking pressure, potential occupants that have a car are likely to look to live in a different location. Finally, with noise and disturbance and amenity issues, during the course of the application, officers raised concerns from occupants of the adjoining properties with regard to sound insulation measures, particularly along party walls and communal areas. The applicant provided photographic evidence of the sound insulation measures to walls and floors, along with specifications of the insulation being installed. This has been reviewed by the Pollution Control Officer, who was satisfied that these measures go beyond building regulation requirements for a residential property. Even though there are no specific regulations for changes from a dwelling to an HMO, these measures would be sufficient. A condition can be added to ensure that the sound insulation measures as specified are retained in perpetuity for as long as the property remains in HMO use. The property would benefit from the required amount of covered bin and recycle storage to the front of the property, and in terms of the garden, the property would remain in residential use, and as such, no concerns are raised in this regard. So our recommendation is the view of officers that the applicant is policy compliant, and the application is policy compliant, and consequently the application is recommended for approval.
Thank you very much. Before we get into the questions, can you just explain slide number 6, which is the map? Because there's little icons that are blue and then little icons that are green. And what's the difference between?
I believe that, if you give me one moment, this comes down to the different types of licence. So you have the mandatory licence, and then there's the additional licence in the 12 inner city wards where, if that's right, where we have the control of HMOs. So they are either the regular licence or the additional licence, but each one of them is a licensed HMO.
Are you able to expand a little bit more on that, Gary?
Only that one of them, the mandatory licence, that's like a national thing. So again, this is Housing Act licensing stuff, so not our kind of area of expertise. But there are certain parameters that require, I think, a HMO anywhere in the country to have a licence from the local authority. But the City Council has had at least 2, if not 3, kind of opportunities which it has taken to say, right, okay, that mandatory system's fine, but we want to regulate more than that. And so they went, I can't remember whether it's 2 or 3 times, but they've kind of identified areas of the city, particular wards, but I don't think they're kind of completely on the boundaries and that, because it has to be evidence-based. The council, in its kind of housing role, has said, right, we want to regularise, all HMOs within those areas. So that's why there are more kind of symbols on that plan than there would normally have been, because the council has actually been proactive and said, right, we want to regulate more. That means that we have that the more HMOs are regulated, which is a good thing, and also it means that we have much more applications for HMO licences as well, and that's been going through the process for, I don't know about this area, but certainly in other parts of the city, 2 or 3 years. And what that has also done for us as well, we've got quite a stretched planning enforcement team as well, where the number of complaints on HMOs, which we are now working through and resolving. That means that we also have a body of information that says, well, hold on, there are HMO licences here. Do they also need planning permission as well? So that's a little bit of background work we're doing. But because the council's got this expanded licence regime in terms of HMOs, it means that we've got much more information on HMOs than we've had before, and that perhaps other parts of the country have. So the evidence base for this assessment is pretty good, I would say. It's not perfect, but it is pretty good.
And do we have any idea of how many HMOs are not yet licensed but going through the system in this area that perhaps aren't going to be on this map, but are perhaps in the process of being assessed because they are actually HMOs?
Yes, so with regards to how we take unauthorised HMOs into account, the adopted HMO SPD says that not all HMOs can be identified as licences, and or planning permissions or authorisation is not required for all properties. Improvements to HMO recording will be sought over time. This may involve the use of additional and or alternative data assets. So in order to make a robust decision, we have to stick to verifiable data, which could be considered as material planning considerations. Where unauthorised HMOs may be operating, they can be reported for investigation. and where retrospective applications result, they would be assessed against the percentage of lawful HMOs at that time.
So there might be properties that are going through that licensing process at the moment that won't be recorded, and we did look at that, and they can't be given weight as material planning considerations. But ultimately, say if more properties in the area that are not identified on that plan at the moment get HMO licences, if they then require planning permission, those applications are going to be assessed on their merits, and they'll be assessed against the percentage in that area. So if, for example, this application got permission, that would add to the 7.7 or 7.8%. So it isn't an opening of the floodgates. Every single new HMO that requires planning permission, which a lot of them do because we're in an Article 4 direction area, which is a planning tool, then they have to be assessed again on the basis of those over-concentration elements, which are the sandwiching and the percentage in the area.
So where I'm particularly going with this is that I've noticed in a statement from somebody that number 25 Oak Road is unlicensed, so therefore it would be a sandwiching effect. So would potentially, in the situation, if 21 got this permission, then 25 goes through the process, would get rejected.
That's right, because you've got to assess the case on its merits at that point in time. And so if this proposal got permission, then that would be a matter of record, and that would add to that, well, the percentage, but crucially the sandwiching issue. Obviously, I can't give you a view now as to whether that would mean that the other one, is it 25, would get refused, but it would be a material planning consideration that a lawful HMO existed the other side of another property.
Great. And then just before we open up the questions, can you just explain a little bit more about how you've worked out with the measurement exactly how many HMOs are there?
Yes, so the HMO threshold calculation. So this is clearly set out on page 14 of the SPD, where there is it's all set up as a diagram. I can pull it up on the screen if you'd like. But it's effectively the total identified dwellings in use as HMOs within a 100-metre radius of the property, divided by the total identified number of dwellings within that radius times 100. So it's a pure mathematical calculation, which is all done on an algorithm. So we put in the property location, and it accurately gives us the data that we need. It's not something that I have to sit down and actually work out. There's no room for error with that calculation.
Okay, because on page 53 of the public forum, the resident says it's 15% of registered, and I think elsewhere it says 19% of unregistered. So what would be your explanation of that discrepancy between their figures and your figures?
I would have to say I don't know where their figures have come from, but our figures are based on verified numbers of HMOs as per the SPD, and that calculation cannot be altered by me or planning officers. It's a calculation we put in the property address, and we receive the data based on the most up-to-date council records.
Okay, thank you very much. Did you want to add to that, Gary?
Only that the SPD and the calculation have been subject to scrutiny at appeals, and where it's been above, in accordance with that calculation, they've been above the 10%. And inspectors given that weight. I mean, just because if it tipped to 10.1% doesn't mean concentration. It's a suggestion. It's an indicator of over concentration. And we have seen an appeal decision recently where an inspector, understanding the calculation methodology and applying, and seeing what the council had applied it to, felt that yes, it did, resulting in over concentration. So I think there's a real credibility around that methodology. So the message is I think we need to stick to that methodology. Anything outside of that, while I can understand if it's based on other local knowledge and that, if it's grounded in evidence, then it's more reliable, really.
Okay, thank you very much. Right, questions. I'll go Fabian first, then Andrew, and then Guy.
Just looking at the potential proposed ground and first floor plans, just need a bit of clarification, please. On the ground floor, you've got one person bedroom with an ensuite, but the design seems to say that there's another door from the ensuite straight into the kitchen dining area, which seems a bit odd. On the first floor, yes, I mean you got. It seems to suggest that the bath is boxed in because there's a door to the shower which you'd expect, but then a door to the bath, or it looks like that, which sort of is just. I mean, you know, if you have to sort of. I'm just trying to work out what on earth is going on with those plans because it just seems a bit odd. There's actually no. If you've got a bath in a cubicle, there needs to be space to dry yourself. There clearly isn't because there's literally the drawing implies that there's a cubicle which literally just contains the bath and not a millimetre of anything else.
Maybe they're just planning on like one of those for ease of cleaning that you can swing out the.
Firstly, on the ground floor, which is probably the easiest one, I believe that's actually the boiler. Because on the existing plans that's where the boiler is. There's a store where that ensuite would be, and behind that's the door to the boiler. On the first floor, I would assume that there is the bath also has a shower, and therefore there's some kind of screen, but it may just be a slight error on the plans.
Andrew.
Yeah, that's what I took it to be, as a shower above the bath with a shower screen. But what was my question going to be? One is, I was listening to what Gary said about the licensing process for HMOs, and I just want to check that I've not misunderstood, because you were talking about if they come through the planning process, the test is applied again, and sandwiching and all that is checked out. So just for clarity, if any of these unlicensed HMOs apply for a HMO license, that test gets run at the point that they're applying for a license. Is that right?
Not when they're applying for a license. So that under the Housing Act and the license will look at the property almost in isolation in terms of standard of accommodation and things like that. But it's like lots of regulation, really. You can't just rely upon one piece of regulation and say, well, I've got this, so why haven't I got something else that the council needs to give me? And the answer to that is, well, like, similar with building regulations, just because somebody gets planning permission for something doesn't mean they've got building regulations. They've got to, ensure that their design, their proposal also matches other regulation that they might need. So, properties, a number of properties do have HMO licenses, but we've got a number of complaints about some of them. And also we've got a kind of a schedule of other properties that have recently received licenses, and we'll be going through them to check whether planning applications are required, and we'll also assess whether permission would actually be granted, and if not, then enforcement action is likely, because part of the part of the SPD was to have better, well, part of the both together. The Article 4 requires the planning applications. The SPD is a sharper tool to assess those planning applications, and alongside that, the Housing Act licence is to not only regulate them under the Housing Act, but also to flush out these properties that are now HMOs. So the over-concentration doesn't come at the licence stage, it would come at the planning regulation stage.
So they could apply for an HMO licence, but not necessarily apply for the appropriate planning permission, but that would get caught in the enforcement process, because you'd just go through the register and go, wait a minute, we've not seen that one. We need to check that out.
That's right, and I think part of the the calculation isn't so limited to say, oh, we're only going to consider HMOs that have got planning permission. That would be far too narrow an assessment. So what it does add, and it's updated on a quarterly basis, is the properties that have a licence. So they may not have both of the things that they need, but they have at least one. And it's at least it's a good indicator as to what the level of overconcentration is going to be if a further one was approved. So it's not perfect, but I think there is a sound rationale behind it.
Okay, thanks. And then my other question is sort of still on the HMO license side of things. So this is going to be 6 people, 2 double bedrooms and 4 single, I think. But how is that controlled in as far as, you know, people who enter through relationships, partners move in, is that effectively prevented by the terms of the HMO license and the rental agreements that are sort of fall under it?
So we are granting permission, well, if this is approved, we'd be granting permission for a change of use from C3 to C4, which is a small HMO up to 6 people. If it was to go above that to 7, it's a separate use class. It would actually be sui generis. So in that respect, if there is evidence that there is more than 6 people living there, there would actually be a breach of planning. Whereas if it was being applied for as a 4-bed and there were 5 or 6 people, it wouldn't. But in that instance, it would actually be operating in a different planning use class. But again, it's still a residential property, and yeah, if young professionals have people staying, or you know, the family property, you have family members staying, or friends staying. So it's not really something that can be regulated.
I appreciate that occasionally people will have, you know, friends, guests, whatever, family, whatever. It's the ongoing. I guess the question is, what's the mechanism to prevent there being multiple, more than 6 people there on an ongoing basis?
Yeah, I think if permission was granted, it's for up to 6 people. Coincidentally, that's the threshold for the type of HMO that's being applied for here under planning. So a 7th person, you know, if we had a complaint, oh no, there's 7 people there, then arguably, because it isn't completely, you know, clear, then arguably that 7th person residing there on a regular basis would tip it into another category of HMO that would require a new planning application. So there is, by the virtue of these circumstances, there is that control there.
Guy, then Lorraine, then Leslie.
Thanks. Sorry, I have a few, but I'll try and be quick. Of all of the HMOs operating in the city, of all of the HMOs that exist, how many would you say are licensed right now?
I'm sorry, I have no idea. I know that because we talked to our housing colleagues about the licensing process. I know they've dealt with a significant amount of Housing Act licensing over the last 3 to 4 years. So I honestly don't know a percentage, but one, it's significantly greater than before, or than it would be if we didn't have this additional licensing control, which is something that the City Council has gone out and proactively done. And it's a significant number, but I honestly have no idea what the percentage is. I would suggest it's quite a high percentage, but I've got no evidence to base that on.
How many times has enforcement forced an unlicensed HMO to apply for planning consent since this policy came in, roughly speaking?
So I sort of go back to this was raised at the Growth and Regen scrutiny this last meeting, because a lot of the licensing, a lot of the complaints about HMOs came in during 2020 and 21, where we COVID restricted, site visits limited, enforcement team reduced in numbers, and so we were kind of held to account by the local government ombudsman about that, because whilst enforcement's a discretionary activity, the ombudsman felt that we'd been too slow. So we've responded to that by moving a member from one team into the enforcement team to lead on this, and that's what they're doing. And so we're working through a caseload of 50 complaints at the moment. We're about a third of the way through that. I think there's a potential for, and then I hold monthly meetings with the team about it. I think there's probably 3 or 4 within that kind of first third. So it's say 15. There's probably about 3 or 4 within that first tranche where they appear to need planning permission. But rather than just ask for an application, if it's an area of over-concentration, we won't ask for an application, we'll just go straight to enforcement notice. So we've got the next update meeting next month where we'll fix what we're doing on some of those sites. So we're at a belated start to that, I think for good reasons, but you know, light's been shone on it now and we're kind of moving through those cases.
I suppose the question I'm coming back to is, the SPD on HMOs was designed to protect the amenity of residents, right? That's what it exists for, principally to do, is to avoid an over-concentration of HMOs to protect the amenity of local residents. And that doesn't really make a difference under those circumstances as to whether these are licensed or unlicensed HMOs. If HMOs are held according to the policy to be damaging to the amenity of local residents, I suppose the challenge I've got here is, it doesn't make a difference to the local resident if it's a licensed or unlicensed HMO. If the council's failing to identify where these HMOs are, it's quite possible, I put it to you as a question, is it possible that actually there's substantially more HMOs in the area than we know about, and then actually there is an over-concentration, we just don't know about it because we failed to enforce?
Chair, no, sorry, I don't accept that. I think we do know where a lot of the HMOs are now because of the licensing. So we've got that body of evidence. We've got a spreadsheet with them all on. They're on a caseload that we'll work through, but through the resources that we've got access to. But we have bolstered that, but having moved someone internally from one team to another. And, you know, we're working through that. The SPD, together, I think the Article 4 directions, because there have been, I think, 3 tranches of those under planning, and the SPD are a very effective tool. The Article 4 directions require a lot more applications than would otherwise be needed. So before the Article 4 direction in this ward, this would have been permitted development. This could just happen. We wouldn't be having this conversation. And indeed, before the SPD was prepared and adopted, we wouldn't be talking about sandwiching, we wouldn't be talking about 10%, you know, we just didn't have that sophisticated tool to assess them on. So the Article 4 brings the applications to the council, and the SPD gives us the tools to do the job. So yeah, it's not happening, it hasn't happened historically as quickly as we would like, but that's been down to resourcing, but we're tackling that at the moment.
Okay, Lorraine?
Yeah, thank you. My question was also about the number of individuals allowed in the property, and I'm pleased that there appears to be a gentleman by the name of Mr. Green who will be enforcing that. So my question is, almost, I know it's a little bit weird, if you've got 2-bedroom dwellings and 1-bedroom dwellings, I think that there is potential for the 2-bedroom dwellings to be used for 2 people. So would it not be advisable to make them all 1-bedrooms? I'm just creating a scenario because I think it's more than likely if you've got 2-bedroom properties, there will be 2 people in there, if you see what I mean. So why not mitigate against that as part of as a recommendation to reduce them all to single dwellings?
I think, am I right in thinking that when you say dwellings, you actually mean bedrooms within the HMO?
Yeah, sorry.
Okay,
yeah, sorry.
So it's possible, but the bedroom that would be a double bedroom could be a single occupant. Somebody might want that as a single. It might be a couple. Unfortunately, we're in a situation where couples can't afford to rent their own property at the moment or to get on the housing ladder. So there is a need for double bedrooms in HMOs. And I think it's important to recognise that as well. But at the end of the day, the application is for a 5-bedroom HMO with up to 6 people. So I think that suggests it could be one person or it could be a couple. But yeah, you do kind of provide that ability for a couple that can't afford their own property to have somewhere to live. And again, it's close to the sound centre, so the sustainability is there as well.
I was just concerned that if concerned neighbours are out there with their binoculars, right, and they're counting the number of people going in and not coming out, and then that whole process would have to end up back here again, you know, to change its use. I'm just thinking about that, because that's going to pressure you to be rehearing this if it was a case of things were to drastically... I mean, you can have two people in a single, you know, room. But I know it's a bizarre question, but I'm just trying to mitigate against ending up with 9 people in there or 10, and who's going to enforce it. That's all.
Again, we have to look at the proposal before us, which is for a 5-bedroom property with up to 6 persons. If there is evidence that the property is not being used as it has planning permission for, then the residents have the right to report that to enforcement, and it would be investigated. But I think at the end of the day, we have to look at the application that's before us. As part of that, we did reduce the number of potential occupants from 8 to 6.
Oh, okay.
Originally, the proposal was for up to 8,
right.
And that was negotiated down to 6. And again, from the use class from sui generis down to C4, with a view to making sure that it couldn't go back above that, because there would be a requirement for further planning permission. So that was all part of the negotiations in reaching this recommendation.
Okay, so I'm a bit late to the game. So thank you. Thanks.
Thank you, Leslie. Oh, Mike.
Mine's also about the registration or the licensing, so hopefully it's the last one. I've got a lot of smaller HMOs which don't require a license, so I have actually asked to have all the HMOs in my ward licensed like they are in certain areas of the city. But those small ones can cause just as much trouble as a large one, and that's what people gets people really going. I've got one lady that keeps writing to me and giving me another list of HMOs in the ward.
Did you have a sort of particular question, or
The question is, don't you think that every HMO should be licensed?
I'm going to answer that. That's a HMO licensing issue for the housing service.
But you see, when my point is that when you say, well, this HMO if you're doing a large one, is okay. There's only half a dozen in quite a large area. There usually isn't. There's an awful lot more.
Again, I'd have to say that we have to look at each application on its individual basis.
It's the small ones that aren't licensed, you don't know about, that cause just as much difficulty as the big ones.
On that note, any property that has 3 people who are not of the same household, I believe that property would need an HMO licence. So again, that's part of the information that we've been building as a council, as Gary was saying, and
there should be a way of knowing that.
Yeah, I mean, we appreciate that not the whole city is covered with HMO licence regime, and I know that's been going to our housing team. That's for them to consider, and likewise would be the same for Article 4 directions. A significant amount of the city is covered, but I'm sure, if you're representing areas outside of that area, then you want that to change. I understand that, but sorry, we've got to focus on this application in this area.
Okay, thank you. Katja?
Forgive me if I've missed it, but it looks like this HMO doesn't even have a bicycle park. Maybe I've missed it. Maybe it's out back.
Yes, there is cycle parking proposed at the rear of the property for up to, I think it's 8 cycles from memory, so one for each occupant and 2 guests. That was changed because originally there were 2 cycle spaces at the front for visitors, but they needed additional waste and recycling, so those spaces were moved to the rear so that they had adequate waste and recycling.
And I hesitate to add, probably because the bicycles will get nicked in the front.
Okay, shall we move to a debate? Does anybody have any comments that they would, or do you have more questions? Are there more questions?
If we were to reject this and the applicants were to appeal, what would be your view on the chances of the appeal being rejected?
I think because we've got a clear way of assessing the level of concentration, and that's, you know, a very kind of open and transparent way in terms of how what's included, and it's updated on a quarterly basis. I think if we're looking at a situation where it's less than 10% HMOs in the 100-metre kind of area, then I think our chances are quite slim, to be honest with you.
Statements or questions?
Technically statements, but if you've got a burning question...
No, it's a statement,
it's a statement,
I'd like to make. I know this is probably not a bearing on our particular deliberations today. However, I do really dislike the fact that people are saying that we need to have these HMOs because young professionals starting out their lives should be allowed to live in squashy little places because they can't afford a flat on their own. It's disgusting. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'd agree. It's not really wanting to kind of go to the lowest denominator for people. Guy?
I have a quick question and then a statement. How confident can you be that there are no additional unlicensed HMOs within the assessment area?
At this time, the data we have, there have been no reports of any others. So, as I understand it, none of the work that the enforcement team are doing relate to this area. So there have been no reported or no HMOs reported to the council for investigation through enforcement within the area.
I'll move on to my statement then. I'm seeing 275 objections and 2 statements in favour. And we've heard today that pretty much everyone that lives anywhere near this area believes that there are more. And my experience in my ward shows that the council has very little idea of how many HMOs there are. We're consistently told, and I welcomed this policy, the SPD, when it came in. We don't have the data to enforce it, in my view, that we need to make it work. We simply don't. We haven't been taking enforcement action. Where we find out about unlicensed HMOs with no planning permission, we're told there's little action that can be taken because we can't do anything to remove the residents that are in there at the moment. We keep piling in these HMOs, creating ever greater and greater density and reducing the residential amenity for residents of that area, and it seems to almost be a matter of policy. I do not know what more councillors, ward councillors and this chamber as a whole can do to control the proliferation of HMOs in the city. It is hugely damaging to the quality of life of our residents. It is reducing the number of family homes in circulation. It is worsening the housing crisis. I do not know what more we can do to change the outcomes that we're seeing in these reports. I've never, by the way, ever, I appreciate I've not been back on this committee that long, seen an officer's report where a statement has been put so firmly in bold at the end of every slide that there's no basis for challenging the information that is written here, when I suspect an awful lot of the ward councillors sat here know how often this information is completely unreliable. So at this point, having not been convinced, I'll be voting against, and I strongly advise the rest of the committee to as well.
Thank you, Guy. I'd also add my own concern as well is that we appear to know from the public forum that there's a 3-bedroomed HMO on the other side. And my concern is that if that's an established HMO with people living there, then following this, the hope would be that that also goes for an application for licence and gets reported for investigation by their ward councillors, and then we're at risk of those 3 people in what could be an established home for them then get ejected because their HMO would be rejected due to sandwiching, which it seems like we're kind of exasperating problems and that would involve 3 people then being homeless. So we're not solving anything, we're just making it worse. Fabian.
If there's genuine belief that that is the situation, would it make sense if we adjourn this one for that to be investigated and we find out whether that is the case, whether there is an HMO 2 doors up? And if there is, then this would therefore cause sandwiching.
Yeah, that would.
And if there is, then obviously we can start the ball. Officers can start the ball rolling of getting that other one licensed and properly under control. But I think, taking on board what Gary said, I think we do need to be looking at how we can make sure our data is really up to date and that we do take action when there is evidence that places are being used as HMOs. Because when it comes to things like enforcement, when it comes to things like appeals, what the inspectors will go on, and years ago I used to work in the planning inspection, what the inspectors will go on is the evidence on there. And stuff that can't be proved won't count. So the question is, how do we make sure that the data we have on HMOs is as up to date as it possibly can? There's always going to be the odd one that slips through, but how do we make it as bulletproof as we possibly can? And that's something we're going to have, planning's going to have to think about, and, planning policy is going to have to think about how we, it's a good SPD, but how do we actually make sure that it's got some teeth and that the data we have is accurate? Because all we've got to go on in making a decision about a case like this is the data we actually have. Now, if there's a sandwiching case, if there's evidence to suggest that 2 doors up is already an established HMO, then I would suggest that we adjourn this one, or
We'd be deferring it, really, wouldn't
defer
it?
this one rather, in order for that to be in order for officers to find out one way or the other whether that is the case.
I would agree, because I don't think we have enough information. The discrepancies between what's being said on numbers in the report and what residents with on the ground, acute knowledge, is a massive discrepancy.
Yeah.
And I don't think we have got enough
And
information.
also, one thing we do need to bear in mind, just to manage our expectations, if we find that 2 doors up is not an HMO, therefore there won't be any sandwiching, as I'm sure Gary's confirmed, we probably don't have a leg to stand on in refusing this, because it would go to appeal and we'd lose.
Yeah, but then that's the thing that we want to know, isn't it? Like, we can't.
Let's get
base
the
a
evidence
decision
first and then
on-
make a decision based on the evidence. And if there's, let's find out one way or the other whether that other property is HMO already or not.
Okay, hold on. A guy's also got his hand up.
I appreciate others will want to contribute to the debate, but I just wanted to add to that. I think Fabian's proposed one test there. I would be more than happy to turn this down on the grounds of half a dozen things that have been raised by both the ward councillor, the residents, and the sheer number of objections to this. So as interesting as using that one property as a test as to whether or not our data systems are good or not, I don't want to fetter our discretion in that context. I would really welcome statements from other members of the committee, though.
Just to come back quickly, I don't think it would fetter our discretion. It's just a question of what our options are, and we won't know what our options are until we have the evidence one way or the other.
I think it would be quite helpful if you've got an idea of sort of the things that you think we could reject it on. If you shared that, then that would help, I think, perhaps with the other members.
Apologies, I feel like I'm jumping ahead by making a proposal when we haven't either finished the debates or moved the
Let's not think of this as a
recommendation.
proposal, more of a where you're at with your thinking.
Come back to me, Chair. I'll be ready.
Okay, all right. Anybody else have anything to add to the debate? Andrew.
I mean, just that I share the frustrations on this, and the particularly over this issue of how many HMOs there are. And I appreciate, you know, we've got the diagram up there, which actually makes it look quite concentrated in places, not necessarily exactly the stretch of the road, but there are a lot of blue dots there. But really, it is very frustrating, you know, that I just don't think we got exactly to the bottom of where the residents' figures are coming from versus the council's figures, and I would have liked to have seen that resolved in order to feel like I was making a informed judgment, and I think there's just too many question marks over that. You know, is there a HMO next door to on the other side or not? You know, the residents, you'd have thought, would be in a position to know that without engaging in, supposition and assumptions. But I think people have a general idea of what's going on in their immediate neighbours' houses, not in them, but in terms of how many residents are there, and that, So I just don't feel confident in what we've got before us to make that judgment today, I think is what I'm trying to say.
Anything else to add? Are you ready yet? Okay, we'll go Philippa.
Just one point. I think what we're talking about is a wider issue, and I'm worried that we're conflating the sort of whole issue of HMO policy with this one application. And I've been a bit concerned that the discussion has been veering off into policy that we can't make in this forum. So that's one concern. The second concern is I do completely, and I have many residents in Horfield who find it very difficult, the concentration of HMOs, but we have a huge number of young people in the city who can't afford anywhere else to live, and they do bring benefits to our city. So, yeah, that's getting off into the policy again, which I said I wouldn't do. So sorry. Thank you.
No, I think we can all sort of sympathise with where you're going with that, because I think none of us want to see anybody without a home, but at the same time, I think we all want to see good quality places for people to live and not kind of race to the bottom with it. And you? Oh, and then Leslie. Sorry, Leslie.
If they're not licensed, then presumably they're not inspected either. And we all read stories of places in Stapleton Road, just to mention one place, where there's about 20 or 30 people living in this tiny little place. They're almost taking shifts on the bed. And a lot of them are people that probably shouldn't be here, although we don't know that they're here. But that's no reason
to go down that road.
Yes, but that's no reason to electrocute them or whatever danger they might be in.
Andrew.
Yeah, I do take Philippa's point. We need to steer clear of maybe getting too involved. And I know a lot of the questions, and my questions were concentrated around policy, which was to help my understanding of the overall framework. And I'm not against HMOs. And I voted for one in Philippa's ward a couple of months ago, but I think it's the point of just not having the confidence in the data at this point that is really getting to me.
Okay, I'd like to wind us up now, and it seems like we've got potentially two proposals, one to defer, one to reject. Guy?
Thank you, Chair. If you were to move the officer's recommendation and it were to fall, I would be minded to propose that we defer to give the officers an opportunity to look at, given the conversation that we've had, what grounds for rejection might look like.
Sure. Yeah, I'd like to move the officer recommendation to approve. If somebody would like to second that, you don't have to, but if you wanted to, you would be welcome to. No? Okay, so that's fallen. Okay.
Move that we defer this application to the next meeting. I'm thinking specifically of things like policy DM2. Is that right? Yeah. Conversions of existing residential properties to HMO will not be permitted where the development would harm residential amenity or the character of the locality. I have to admit, this wasn't something that massively jumped out at me first time, but the idea that 6 adults will have roughly the same number of cars as a family strikes me as unlikely. So I'd have transport concerns around it as well. If anyone else wants to add anything else, please do, but I'm confident officers can look back on the records of this discussion and pull out what they think are the most prurient details.
Joe, on your point about if the house up the road is an HMO and not registered, you know, the sandwiching issue, I think we should look at that. I think we should ask officers to actually find out one way or the other whether that house is an HMO, because I take your point. There's nothing gained if we end up, if this gets permission, then that one gets refused on sandwiching grounds and those 3 people then get made homeless. That's not really going to help anybody, is it?
No.
So I think finding out one way or the other with that property would be good. So I'd like that added to the reason for deferral.
Mm-hmm. Did you have anything else to add, Guy?
Chair, I'm finding challenging, one of the things I'm finding challenging is that during recent events has caused me to be looking at the electoral roll quite a lot. It's quite easy to identify HMOs from the electoral roll. It's not hard to identify a property that you think might be being used as an HMO. And I'd be really curious to see what would happen if we actually looked at that 100-metre radius and that street as a whole, and whether planning might be interested in taking this on as a bit of a project to see how many HMOs actually are on that street, rather than just looking at it in terms of complaints and people who apply out of the goodness of their heart for planning or license or an HMO license.
Chair, can I just ask what we're being asked to vote upon?
We're currently discussing terms for a deferral of the application. So the motion to approve it as officer recommendation has fallen. So now we're discussing a deferral of the application and the reasons for it.
I didn't quite understand what Councillor Breckles was attempting to do.
On top of Councillor Portney's suggestion about parking and what residential amenity, I was suggesting, because earlier in the debate we had, there's an issue of sandwiching. So if you've got a house that's ordinary residential and you've got a house on one side that's an HMO, you then can't turn the property on the other side of them into an HMO, because that gets what's called sandwiching. You've got one family residence or sandwich between 2 HMOs. So there's a suggestion that the house 2 doors up from the application site is already in use as an HMO. So I've asked for officers to find out one way or the other whether that is the case or not.
So effectively you're amending the original proposal?
No,
Yep.
I'm adding to the deferral. I'm making it 3 reasons for deferral rather than 2. I'm adding an additional reason.
We can't be expected to vote on something like that. If we're going to vote on something, it needs to be clear cut.
I'm being very clear cut. I want to find out whether what's the name of the what's the address of the property.
Everybody is descending into an argument. Let's just breathe a second. Gary wanted to come back on a couple of points. Let's just let that happen first.
Okay, thank you, Chair. And noting that the officer recommendation has not progressed at the meeting and won't do so, in that context, I've heard the kind of reference to deferral, reference to DM2 and impact on amenity, character of the area, car generation, then down to the issue about whether this property 2 doors down is a HMO. Just 2 kind of things I wanted to say about that. One, it's not straightforward to establish whether something is in use as a HMO, and there's a few suggestions there, but to have, to come to a definitive view on that isn't straightforward. So we'll do our best ahead of the next meeting to do that. And then just to kind of reassure you that in any case where HMO is found doesn't have planning permission and is not right to get permission, we worked this through with members at the time who were almost like a working party on the SPD, who represented wards that were absolutely impacted by HMOs, which you know who I'm referring to, but both of those members were really, really keen that if we were taking enforcement action, we were humane about it, and that the period of compliance to stop using it as a HMO actually tied in with the tenancy. So it wasn't a case of moving people on. It was a case of ultimately it would stop being a HMO, but there was some, you know, reasonableness about when the use would stop and when those people would move out of the property. So I just wanted to absolutely reassure you about that. But you know, if the prospect is deferral, then as officers, I feel we've got enough to go on to kind of do some more investigating and come back to you next time around.
That's great. I like what you say about sort of reasonable ending of it. But would that be sort of tied into the end of a tenancy agreement?
Yes, but seeing what period that was, clearly if it was a really long period, then no, we'd be kind of looking to curtail that, but in a reasonable way. But certainly, you know, the input from members at the time was to be, you know, to get on top of this, but also to be humane about it as well, because at that point in time it's still someone's home.
And hopefully the other extreme as well. So if it was only a month or so, if it was like a 6-month tenancy, they wouldn't be ejected too rapidly. That's good. Okay, so we've got enough to go on with a deferral. Guy, you're proposing that, I assume? Okay, brilliant. We'll do a roll call again. So this is for a deferral of the application. Are you clear on this, Chris?
I am now, thank you, Chair.
Good, great, fabulous. I'm going to start to my left again with Lorraine.
Defer.
Yeah, so that's a for the deferral. Yeah, great. Chris?
4.
Leslie? Andrew?
4.
Guy?
4.
Philippa?
Abstain.
Katya?
4.
Fabian?
4.
And for me, it's also a 4. Thank you very much. That draws this meeting to a close. Thank you for your attendance. I can't remember when we're meeting next, but I'm sure it'll be fun. Thank you.